Chapter 261. Everyone in the command center's eyes lit up. They didn't know how many soldiers the Horde had left. Adding the 100,000 orcs here and the ones intercepted by Dalen's fleet, it was definitely a heavy blow to the Horde. From the looks of it, the humans wouldn't lose more than 20,000 people. No matter how one looked at it, this was a great victory that only happened once in a century. Duque had just retracted his gaze from the Windrunner sisters, who were evenly matched with Master Howl. He was shocked to find that the battle between the strongest sorcerer of Azeroth and the strongest sorcerer of Draenor had already come to an end. It was a draw. Antonidas and Gul'dan clutched at their wounds. The left shoulder of Antonida's sorcerer robe had been burned. A black rune with an evil aura was wriggling on Antonida's old body. Antonidas was using arcane energy to dispel the rune, but it wasn't very effective. On the other side, Gul'dan had also been hit. A huge ice prism had pierced through his left shoulder. From the wound, ice patterns spread toward Gul'dan's heart like a spider web. Gul'dan injected the destructive flames in his hand into his shoulder to resist the invasion of the cold. Humph. I'll spare your life today. Next time, I'll leave your filthy head behind. The two of them turned around and left without hesitation. Antonidas reluctantly teleported back to the command center. Gul'dan waved his hand and turned into a cloud of black fog, disappearing from the sea. Master, how are you? Uther, come and help. The place where Antonidas was covered started to emit thick darkness. The sticky black aura had a strong sense of ominous, and it tried to drill into the depths of the old magician's body and corrode his magic circuits. Fortunately, Uther's holy light was even brighter. Even though sweat was dripping from his forehead, Uther spent about 5 minutes to completely dispel the darkness. Thank you. It seems like the Holy Knight is a great profession, Antonidas praised sincerely. Antonidas praised from the bottom of his heart. He then turned to Duke. What a terrifying orc warlock. I'm no match for him. If I go all out, I'll definitely be the one to die. At most, I'll only be able to injure him moderately. I don't know why he's pretending to be heavily injured. All I can say is that he'll need at most a week to recover, but I might not be able to fight for the Alliance by then. Don't worry. He won't come again. Duque said with absolute certainty. Are you sure? Yes. Duque turned to look at Krasis in the Dalajan crowd. Please send Mr. President back to the Dalajan first, and then ask Archbishop Fao to go to the Dalajan and check Mr. President thoroughly. It would have been best to send Antonidas to Lordaeron. Due to political reasons, Antonidas would rather stay in his old nest to recuperate. Krasis quickly opened a portal, connected it to the Dalajan, and sent Antonidas away. Not long after, Krasis opened a portal and hurried back. The orcs were not stupid. After their several charges were repelled, no matter how stupid they were, they realized that with so many people crowded on the coast, sooner or later they would be wiped out. They gave up the blind attack and seemed to be waiting for something. Duque's pupils suddenly shrank to the size of a needle's eye. It's here. It's finally here. Duque stood up and slammed his hand on the table. Pass the order, all cavalry regiments are ready to launch a countercharge against the enemy along the established route. All reserves are to enter combat positions, with the spear team and the javelin team as the main force. It was finally their turn. In the command center, a group of tough generals had been waiting impatiently. If it weren't for Duque's magnificent command, suppressing the tribes time and time again, maybe some kings would have protested. Now with Duque's order, more than half of the people in the command center left. As he walked down the hill, Uther was a little puzzled. General Lothar, are we going to counterattack from the ruins of South Shore to the coast? I'm still wondering about this order. Are there any cavalry on the tribe's side? I don't think there's anything in the tribe that can stop your cavalry regiment and my silver hand. General Haas, the commander of Alterac, was also puzzled. It's even more strange on my side. They actually want my Eagle Knights to attack the enemy along the slope of the East Hill, which is not too steep. The Eagle Knights are indeed mountain knights, and they are also used to fighting in complex terrain. But I see that General Lang's infantry is also doing well. I can't think of a reason for reinforcements. Lothar smiled. It was an extremely sunny smile. Can you write 10 or 20 reports at the same time? No, Uther answered truthfully. How is that possible? Haas asked rhetorically. But I know that strong mages have the metamagic ability, multicasting. That is, the ability to do two things at the same time, or even many things. Duque is such a genius, he can quickly read many times more reports than we do. He also often finds a lot of details that we don't notice. For those threats that he is uncertain about, he will make preparations, but because he can't convince everyone, he will be used to silence. Lothar paused and continued, however, it has been proven again and again that the preparations he has made and the backup he has arranged are correct and effective. Even if I don't want to admit it, I have to admit that he is above me in terms of the overall situation and the art of command. If he were a melee professional, maybe he would be the commander-in-chief. What Lothar said was another fact of this era. People who regarded chivalry as the supreme tended to admire melee heroes more than the mysterious and unpredictable spellcasters. More people subconsciously believed that only those who fought head-on were real men. 10 minutes later, the signal to attack came. Many new creatures appeared on the coast, much taller than the orcs. Except for a few orcs who could be more than 3 meters tall, the orcs were generally about 2.5 meters tall. But these creatures could easily reach a height of about 4 meters. Ogres. These huge creatures joined the battle. They waved giant sticks that looked like uprooted trees. They roared and rushed up the hill. Bows and javelins were useless. Even if a dozen spears pierced the bodies of the ogres, they wouldn't be able to end the lives of these ferocious monsters unless they pierced their vitals. And every time the giant wooden sticks were swung, a bunker was smashed, and an entire row of shield soldiers was smashed away. The shield wall that the humans relied on to fight against the orcs became the biggest fatal weakness, which allowed the ogres to cause massive casualties with every blow. Apart from the ballistae and cannons on the top of the hill, there was nothing that could stop the march of these giant creatures. The soldiers were defeated by this powerful blow. The orc soldiers attacked through those gaps and quickly spread out, sweeping up the alliance soldiers in the trenches. A group of figures wearing heavy cloaks and riding heavily armored warhorses appeared on the slightly dilapidated pier, each horse's eyes shining with dazzling red light. Chapter 262. The Eagle Knights led by Haas attacked the horde along the river at the foot of the eastern hill. Now that Antonidas and Ghoul, Dan were no longer in the way, in order to attack the eastern mountain in a more comprehensive manner, many tribes first came to the river bank and then took a detour to attack the mountain from the side. When the Eagle Knights arrived, the defensive line on the hill was already very tight. On the front line, Tyrion and General Tom could often be seen leading the reserves as firefighters to fill in the gaps in the position. From time to time, even Lang had to personally lead the troops into battle. The only good thing was that Stormwind's reserves were quite sufficient. It was just that the casualty ratio was shocking. It was under these circumstances that the Eagle Knights circled around to the flank of the horde attacking the hill. "Level your spears," Haas shouted. The knights lowered their nearly 4-meter-long spears and urged their mountain horses to charge from the side. Alterax's Eagle Knights weren't heavy cavalry in the traditional sense. Considering the mountainous terrain, the armor of this group of knights was between light cavalry and heavy cavalry. They didn't have heavy armor, only light chain mail and a layer of leather armor. The warhorses were also only equipped with a piece of leather armor. On the complicated terrain of the river and the hills, the Eagle Knights performed quite well. With the heavy sound of hooves, the knights quickly scattered, looking for their own targets. When the target was more than 2 meters away, they had already stabbed their spears, hitting the enemy's vitals. At the same time, the momentum of the warhorses pierced deep into the enemy's body. At the same time, the well-designed spear couldn't withstand the powerful reaction force and began to explode to the side. The unlucky ones who were stabbed fell to the ground, and the knights casually abandoned the remaining half of the spear, pulled out Alterax's special double-edged broadsword, and slashed at the horde's warrior's neck. The quick charge cut off the horde's fierce attack. But Haas didn't stop. He took his men around the beach and quickly retreated from the river. The cavalry that had lost their speed couldn't even be compared to the infantry when faced with the tall orcs. Moreover, in that kind of fierce battle, the Eagle Knights suffered a lot of losses. The regular forces were dealt with by the regular troops. Transcendent monsters were naturally dealt with by the insanely strong paladins. Uther, who was charging forward, quickly saw the opponent that Duque had almost tailor-made for them. They covered their faces with scarves, so only their eyes could be seen. Each of them carried a huge two-handed sword. The cavalry from Lordaeron treated them like fools and were prepared to teach them a lesson with their spears. In the rules of cavalry, it was common sense to charge at each other with a lance. Using a heavy sword against a lance, this was the only way. In their hearts, they were praising their luck, and were prepared to make use of the advantage of their lances to take down the enemy. Wuthor heard countless unfamiliar buzzing sounds. 30 meters away, the charging cavalrymen fell to the ground in front of these guys. Even the cavalrymen of the Rotterdam kingdom who did not fall to their deaths on the spot did not draw their swords to attack the moment they got up. Instead, they felt as if they were about to bleed from their 7 orifices as they clutched their heads tightly with both hands. Ah! The cavalrymen rolled on the ground in pain and let out inhuman howls. In the name of the holy light. Wuthor witnessed all this with his own eyes. At this moment, he completely understood why Duque wanted the Silver Hand Knights to fight against these cloaked guys. These are demons. They are using evil magic to attack us. After saying that, Wuthor raised his warhammer high. Several holy seals were added to the warhammer, and the top of the warhammer emitted a silver light like the moon. "Stand up, soldiers!" Wuthor shouted in his loud voice. "The holy light will drive away the darkness, but you must use your weapons to defend your honor." Dazzling light spread from the warhammer, echoing the bright light of dawn, and instantly driving away the darkness from the land. The holy light shone on the warriors, and when the cloaked men raised their hands again, not a single one of them fell. Although the people who got up and the cavalry behind them were still a little scared, when they found that no one fell, they mustered their courage again and let out a deafening roar, charging towards the cloaked knights. However, at the moment of fighting, not only the cavalrymen, but even Wuthor was stunned. This was because this group of guys were wearing the standard armor of the Stormwind cavalry. The only difference was that they used the spiked pauldrons commonly used by tribal warriors. No. Why? A Rotterdam cavalry screamed. During the days of gathering in South Shore, they had been repeatedly asked by their officers to identify the equipment of the various allies. They could not accept suddenly finding their allies standing on the opposite side of the enemy. While they were in a daze, many of them fell to the ground. Wuthor saw the other party's face clearly again. Their faces were pale, lifeless, and bloodless. A pair of evil blue eyes glowed with clear hostility. Most importantly, Wuthor did not feel any life from them. Blasphemy. The filthy tribal warlocks actually resurrected the dead into living corpses. Silver Hand, defeat them. Wuthor waved his huge two-handed hammer and easily knocked a Death Knight off his undead warhorse. Abundant golden holy light poured into the Death Knight's body, and the guy was blown to pieces by the holy light before he reached the ground. The Alliance soldiers cheered again, encouraged by the amazing skills and power of the paladin. Turalyon, who was at the rear, felt very conflicted. As a paladin, he should be with them, but as Lothar's adjutant, he should stay in the center of South Shore and accompany Lothar to command. The battle between the paladin and the Death Knight began, and neither side could gain the upper hand. At the beginning, Wuthor killed 4 or 5 Death Knights in a row, but he immediately met his opponent. A tall guy who claimed to be Terran Gorfiend actually withstood Wuthor's attack. Turalyon saw a Death Knight grab Dathrahan's arm with one hand when they were competing in strength. That hand that looked like a corpse radiated darkness. However, Dathrahan used the holy light to dispel the darkness. Immediately after, Dathrahan took advantage of the moment when that guy retracted his hand and directly hit his head with his hammer. Their skulls shattered like broken porcelain. Turalyon noticed that there was not a drop of blood flowing out of the skull. It was all dry brain matter. On the other hand, the Death Knights were able to win against the normal Alliance cavalry. Turalian suddenly noticed the signal coming from the hill. Chapter 263. The Death Knights and Ogres were indeed two big cards. If they were ambushed by these two troops, the Alliance would definitely suffer heavy casualties. As a transmigrator, Duque remembered at least 70% to 80% of history. When a surprise attack was no longer a surprise attack, the so-called surprise attack would only be a joke. Duque raised his hands and waved his index fingers at the sky. Windsor immediately understood. "Send my order, the Dalajan mages get ready." "Your Excellency Kel Thuzad?" "Your Excellency Krasis?" "No problem. We've been ready for a long time." Both of them replied affirmatively through the magic communication. Below, the two cavalries fighting fiercely on the ruins of South Shore were already fighting for real. "Send my order to retreat." Turalian shouted to the nearest messenger. He knew that this person would use his horn to spread the order. "Cover each other. Retreat outside the town and regroup." The soldier nodded and raised his horn. He blew it twice, then another long horn. After hearing this, the squad leader began to shout orders to his own team to gather their soldiers. In fact, it was not easy, especially in a chaotic situation where both sides were entangled. Fortunately, the Rotterdam cavalry had made arrangements early in the morning, and their tactical execution was quite good. They took out chain-flying hammers that looked like hinges used for cannons. These little things with two round metal balls connected by chains in the middle was a simplified version of a tripwire. They were thrown directly at the leg of the Death Knight's horse. Under the effect of inertia, the small ball would naturally spin around the horse's leg. Regardless of whether it was a dead horse or a flaming horse, its speed would still be reduced. Most of the cavalries got rid of their opponents. The Hand of Silver was in charge of the rear position. The Death Knights who did not receive new orders chose to pursue. Just as the Alliance cavalry pulled away from the Death Knights, bright lights flashed on both sides of the hills. The Dalajan mages. Even when the main battlefield was at its most critical, Duque did not send out these killing weapons like the Pharaoh. Even when the Ogre mages appeared on the battlefield and beat up the mages of the Storm King family and the Rotterdam Kingdom on the two hills, Duque did not use them at all. Good steel should be used on the blade's edge. In Duque's opinion, a battle of attrition between a mage and a warlock was too boring. If he wanted to use it, he would use it to eliminate the enemy's elites. This was only the second battle at the Dark Portal. Before the Doomsday Army came out, the Death Knights of the Horde were very valuable. Although the bodies of these Death Knights belonged to Stormwind City, their souls were those of Ghoul Dan's warlocks who were killed by Orgrim. Only these warlocks could allow newborn Death Knights to easily grasp dark magic. It doesn't matter if these warlocks are high-ranked warlocks or apprentice warlocks, in any case, one dead is one less. As long as they die here, paladins can purify their souls, even Ghoul Dan can't resurrect them as Death Knights. The name of the battle this time was Beastman's Blood. With the amplification of the battle magic formation, the power and range of each mage's magic were greatly increased. The money spent on this magic formation alone was enough to equip an infantry regiment of 5,000 people. It was all worth it. The huge fireball that blotted out the sky and covered the earth poured down from the hills on both sides, leaving long trails of flames behind. That spectacular scene made countless people raise their eyebrows. Even the retreating Rotterdam cavalry and paladins of the Silver Hand couldn't help but be tongue-tied. It was too magnificent. The fireballs that poured down from both sides were like two huge waterfalls of fire, easily crossing the distance of hundreds of meters and blasting towards the Death Knights. The fireballs fell on the ruins of South Shore like a torrential rain, causing an effect that exceeded everyone's imagination. South Shore, which had become incomparably dilapidated after the battle between Antonidas and Ghoul Dan, was now injected with the elemental life force called flames and came to life. Everything surged with flames, and everything they touched was violently dyed in the color of flames, forming a scene that seemed like the end of the world. At first, the Death Knights who had lost their senses were still chasing the Alliance cavalry on their undead warhorses, but soon, they were drowned by the explosion. The terrifying explosion plowed through the ruins of South Shore again. After a round of attacks, there was nothing left to continue standing in the flames. Ha ha ha. Perish, dirty bones. Really go to hell, don't stand up again. The Rotterdam cavalry vented their frustrations from being suppressed just now. Even with the blessing of Uther's holy light, they could not fight like real paladins, after all. That had nothing to do with combat skills, and was purely suppressed by the evil power of the enemy. Now, they vented to their heart's content. Woo! 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 The horn sounded. It was a signal for all the cavalrymen to retreat. We're still retreating. Turayan frowned. Noxus laughed. Ha ha ha. Duque is really greedy, but I like it. Ha 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 ha. On the other side, Duque contacted Gina Goldsword directly through magic communication. Ms. Goldsword, how's General Daylin? Duque asked urgently. Coming. Almost in response to Dalin's confident answer, the sails of Curtila's fleet appeared in everyone's field of vision. The orcs were alarmed. Almost every orc commander realized that they were in big trouble. That's right, the coastline of South Shore was the widest, and the most suitable for a landing battle. The problem was that if they could not attack, the hundreds of thousands of orcs would all be squeezed on the narrow and long coastline. They would be the best targets for the fleet's cannons. On the flagship, seeing so many tribes squeezed on the coast, General Daylin was ecstatic. Open all the cannons and use the grape shot. I want these green-skinned creatures to go to hell. It was early in the morning, and the wind was right. It was perfect for Curtila's fleet, which used sails. The sail, which was originally just a tiny dot, rapidly expanded in everyone's field of vision. There was a sudden burst of cheers that could turn the entire world upside down. Hooray! Blast those bastard green-skinned creatures to death. Don't even think about charging over. Just stay down there and take the cannons. The orcs launched a desperate charge, trying to break through the defense line of the hill. Even the ogre mages were charging, but the Dalajan mages suppressed the ogre mages very well. Chapter 264. The Alliance soldiers stood tightly on the defensive line on the hill, holding their weapons steadily. Their spears were pointed diagonally downwards and stabbed at any approaching orcs. The soldiers formed a continuous shield wall, and the trained javelin soldiers kept throwing rain of death from the higher trenches. The orcs kept attacking these squads with absolute numbers, but they could not break through the Alliance's defensive line. At this moment, the sound of cannons rang out in the distance. Duque clenched his fists in excitement. This was what he wanted. Artillery and infantry coordination. Land and sea coordination. These two concepts were completely foreign to the world of Azeroth, but to Duque, who was a transmigrator and a fan of the fake military, it was like a drizzle. The cannons of this era had very big limitations. These primitive breech-loading cannons had a short range, and their power was limited. No general or marshal would have thought of asking the fleets that entered the battlefield later to help with the cannons. To the kings of the Alliance, as long as the Alliance could withstand this wave, it would be a very impressive victory. Who would have thought that Duque's appetite was so big that he actually wanted to swallow all 100,000 orcs? And it was about to come true. In the command center, the faces of the remaining 4 kings were filled with shock and awe. Kurtiraz's complete First Fleet, the half-destroyed Third Fleet, the 4th Fleet that was chased away by Lord Howl, and the Storm Fleet took advantage of Lord Howl's fight with the Windrunner sisters to approach the shore together. Their cannons were fully opened, and a sky full of bullets poured down on the shoreline that had turned green. A series of flashes quickly flashed across the ship in the distance, followed by rising black smoke that temporarily covered the entire ship. It's here. Every Alliance soldier had an excited heart beating in their chest. When King Lang saw thousands of black lines across the morning blue sky from the top of the hill, he even forgot to continue to encourage his soldiers. Those steel beads mixed with the blazing aura of gunpowder intertwined with each other in the air. In some places, the steel beads were so densely packed that they actually collided with each other in the air, producing a series of crackling sounds. But there was no problem. It was as if God had scattered a large plate of black beans from the sky, sprinkling them on the beach with a piercing hum. Even though they knew that the next scene would be spectacular, the Storm Wind soldiers and the Rotterdam soldiers on the hill were still stunned by the scene in front of them. The terrifying shellfire plowed through the orcs on the beach. The place was originally crowded with green dwarves, but after a round of fire, only a few were left standing. A sieve-like formation appeared in front of the Alliance soldiers. Just as the Alliance soldiers thought that victory was at their fingertips, a voice suddenly rang out from the battlefield. It was a sentence that was continuously shouted out. Lokhtaragar, he would rather die than win. Tens of thousands of orcs recovered from their shock and shouted the same slogan. The wills of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of orcs converged into one, turning into a raging tide. Unfortunately, this tide was extinguished before it could reach the Alliance's camp. Pass my order, use the firewall technique. Duque ordered coldly. Dalaran's mages immediately released a high wall of flames on the hillside of the two Alliance mountains. Wall of Fire was not a spell with a good price-performance ratio. To maintain the wall of flames, they had to constantly inject mana. For low-level mages, maintaining it for a few minutes would deplete all their mana. In most battles, this spell was not very practical. However, at this crucial moment, the appearance of the firewall technique extinguished the last thoughts of the horde. The orc warriors were not paladins who could temporarily rely on the holy light to become invincible. How much combat power could they have if they risked their lives to charge through the firewall? This attack directly smashed the morale of the horde. Finally, the horde's retreat horn sounded. Retreat? How could it be so easy to retreat after landing on the beach? Duque did not know who the commander of the horde was this time, but he was sure that Orgrim was not here. However, it was not easy for the horde to retreat. Their only path of survival was in the direction of the East Beach, because they knew that the Alliance's tight defense line was still there if they retreated to the west coast. Moreover, the sea facing the west coast was deep water. As long as Cortira's fleet was there, they would not be able to board the transport ship back alive. The east side was different. Even though the entire coast from South Shore to Tangarok in the southeast were guarded by Stormwind soldiers. The sea facing the east coast was shallow water with a depth of less than 3 meters. The Alliance's ships could not enter, and this was the horde's only hope. In fact, the horde was retreating in that direction, and the transport ship was also moving in that direction, ready to receive the horde's warriors. However, it was not that easy. Magar, have your mere people go to the sea facing the east beach to snipe the orcs. Gu, yes, master. Without waiting for Duque's order, Lothar personally led the cavalry to chase after the orcs when they retreated. This was a rare opportunity to beat the orcs when they were down. Other than Lang, who did not dare to advance too recklessly, who continued to defend his own hill and continued to attack the horde passing by, the bombardment had already extended to the east beach. On the hill to the west, Mograine and Abendus had already led their troops down like ferocious tigers, chasing after the horde's tail. On the entire battlefield, the battle was nearing its end. Looking down from the sky, the silver torrent representing the Alliance was in a semi-encirclement, chasing after the remaining green parts along the coastline. The horde had sent out many troops to cover the rear, but none of them could hold on for long. They were quickly torn apart by the fierce bombardment of the Alliance's long-range weapons and the fierce impact of the Alliance's army. They were quickly swallowed up by the human torrent. In the Alliance's command, thunderous cheers were heard. This was the first victory since the establishment of the Alliance, and it was also a rather great victory. Congratulations, Deputy Chief Marcus. The most excited king of Stormguard, Tolbane, was the first to shake hands with Duque. The Alliance's victory would undoubtedly greatly reduce the pressure on Riptide Fortress. No matter how good the defense of Solderbridge was, being besieged every day was not a long-term solution. Thank you. Duque smiled. The second to come up was King Terina's. Sure enough, it's the world of the young now. Kalia misses you very much, come to Lordaeron more often when you have time. The king of Lordaeron's words were clear. Duque forced a smile and nodded. Yes, yes, I will definitely go when I have time. Yes, I am very busy. The third was King Xian. Now it's good, at least we taught those green-skinned creatures a lesson. I don't have to worry about waking up with a bunch of green-skinned creatures on the kingdom's beach. There are still many orcs, we need to continue working hard. The last was King Eden. This Alterac king had always given Duque the impression of being gloomy, cunning, and astute. Just as Eden was about to say something, a sudden change occurred. A sharp longsword pierced through Duque's chest. At. Chapter 265. You should be able to hear me, right? I'm sorry, I admire your wisdom, but if you don't die, the beastmen will not be able to rule this world. A quick and clear beastman language came from behind Duque. Every word entered Duque's ears, reminding Duque of who killed him. Fireblade Clan. Duke's heart was completely cut in half by the sharp blade. He coughed up blood, and blood spurted out from the gaps between his teeth that were full of blood. You really know our tribe well. It seemed to be a sigh, but it also seemed to have made up its mind. With a twist of the blade, a cold light burst forth from Duke's chest, splitting Duke's entire body into two halves. King Alterac Eden was dumbfounded. Perhaps he was very resourceful and full of ideas, but he had never been a courageous and daring king. This was something all kings looked down on. Seeing the star of the alliance, who was about to shake hands with him, suddenly killed, King Eden collapsed to the ground, tears and snot flowing out of his eyes. The other three kings were also stunned. Tyreena's was frozen in fear, while Jean and Salas pulled out their swords at lightning speed. PSSSH, more than 10 sounds rang out, as if they were the same note. Inside the hall were the dignitaries of various countries. Although many generals had already left the mountain, the dignitaries never lacked guards. Unfortunately, these sounds came from the chests or throats of the guards. More than 10 guards were assassinated on the spot by the sudden appearance of the orc. Among all the guards, only Windsor and Gavinrad activated divine protection to block this fatal blow. Even though there were over 1,000 guards in attendance outside the command center, at this moment, in this enormous command center, there were only the 4 kings, Windsor and Gavinrad left, a total of 6 living people. The king's pupils contracted as they finally saw their enemies. They were all tall, with ferocious faces and protruding fangs. They carried large flags with domineering words on their backs, and held 3-foot-long burning blades in their hands. They were all sword saints of the Fireblade clan. They had crossed the entire battlefield in an unimaginable way and arrived at the headquarters of the Alliance, which was overlooking the ocean. There, they had planned a decapitation strategy. I was too careless. He was too careless. The impending victory had paralyzed everyone. The soldiers could not wait to participate in the pursuit and taste the first great victory of the human alliance against the orc tribe. No one had expected the other party to be so sinister. This was worse than the last time Ryan was ambushed. If more than half of the kings of the alliance fell here, the country that lost the king would inevitably fall into chaos, and the alliance would inevitably collapse. No matter what great victory Lothar achieved on the front line, it would not help. To the tribe, these sword saints of the Fireblade clan were so close to becoming heroes. Just a little bit more. The only thing they didn't expect was that Duque would be resurrected. The surrounding air instantly dropped to the freezing point, and a tornado-like blizzard appeared in the blink of an eye. The sword saints had long since realized that something was wrong, but the snowflakes in front of them were so large that they could not even see their own fingers. It had to be said that the leading sword saint was definitely a top-notch expert. He did not hesitate for even half a second and immediately pulled out Blade Storm. The sword saints of the Fireblade clan would definitely know how to deal with this move, but it was a different matter for humans. In such a narrow space, there was no space to dodge at all, and it was not just one Blade Storm, but more than 10. All the sword saints used their ultimate moves at the same time as if they had a tacit understanding. Even if these sword saints were not as powerful as the leading sword saint, the Blade Storm that was blasted out was not to be underestimated. Looking at the sword light that filled their vision, even though they knew that there was a mage protecting them, all the kings were scared out of their wits. Scram! A loud roar sounded like thunder from the sky, causing everyone's eardrums to ring. The next moment, the entire ground of the command center exploded with dozens of huge ice prisms. The kings suddenly felt as if they were in the middle of a snow-colored forest. They immediately came back to their senses, and they had a question in their minds. Where were those damn sword saints of the orcs? The stone ceiling was pierced through by a large pile of ice prisms. The sword saints were also sent flying. Spin. Aren't you all very good at spinning? I'll let you guys spin around as much as you want. On the ground, Duke's figure appeared from the dissipating white fog, pointing at the sky and cursing. Yes, using one's high-speed spinning to create countless sword auras that were as sharp as blades was indeed very awesome. Don't forget, the blade storm of the sword saints came from spinning, and spinning required a fulcrum to stand on. What Duke did was to send all these fulcrum flying into the air. The sword saints were so depressed that they wanted to vomit blood. What happened to the promise of eating the king's heads together tonight? What happened to the promise of using their ultimate moves to destroy the heavens, the earth, and the air? The legendary ultimate move that would definitely cause a bloodbath had all become a fool's one-man show. It was not that they did not want to stop, but this kind of terrifying ultimate move that erupted all of their energy in an instant was not something that could be stopped easily. They also wanted to move away from the ice prisms under their feet and then slash at Duke. But the ice prisms under their feet continued to thicken and extend, not letting them fall. As a result, under the gaze of thousands of Alliance soldiers, the roof of the Alliance's headquarters was lifted off, and then more than a dozen small tornadoes of sword blades spun continuously in the air. It was not known whether this scene was terrifying or funny. This situation directly alarmed many soldiers who were chasing at the front lines. Not good. Every general's face was pale. Stop. Everyone, return. Turayan shouted nervously. Wait. Noxus stopped Turayan's recklessness. What can we do if we go back now? Duque should be fine. If he's here. Almost at the same time, the mages responsible for communications around every general received a message from Duque. All the important personnel are fine. The headquarters is under attack. Krasis. Kel Thuzad is back. Duque was very calm and very clear-headed. If he called for the cavalry to return now, they would definitely not make it in time. But the two pharaohs were another matter. A series of flash lights lit up on both sides of the mountain. There was no time to lock onto the coordinates of the teleportation, so the two famous pharaohs of the future used the fastest and most violent method, using flash continuously to hurry on their way. Low-ranked mages had to rest and adjust their magic circuits after each use of flash, but there were no such restrictions for Radiant Moon mages. While others could travel 20 yards with a blink, these two fellows could travel 200 yards with a single blink. Moreover, they didn't even need to pause. They were practically burning with anxiety. Originally, Duque had planned to hold out until the two of them returned, but Duque suddenly found an opportunity. Chapter 266. The system elf spoke, which was rare, dear host. Do you want to eat them alone? I've scanned them and found that they seem to have skill books that you can use. The system elf was connected to Duque's brain, and this kind of brainwave communication took almost no time. Skill book? Why would a mage like me need a blade master's skill book? I'm tired of carrying such a big kitchen knife. I don't know, but their energy fluctuations are similar to yours. If you can kill them alone, you might be able to extract the skill book from the energy in their bodies. Wow. That's possible. At this moment, Duque was excited. Duque yelled loudly. What skills did a blade master have? There were so many blade master's skills. But the core of a blade master were still those 4 skills. Gale Step could make a blade master invisible and increase his movement speed. If a blade master attacked a target while invisible, it would cause additional damage and reveal himself. This was much more powerful than a thief's invisibility. Mirror image could create an illusion of a blade master to confuse the opponent and eliminate all unfavorable magic effects. Critical strike could increase the probability of a blade master dealing more damage when attacking. Needless to say, blade storm, the rapidly rotating blades could easily injure all enemy ground troops in the vicinity, and also made the sword saint immune to magic. Any one of these 4 skills could bring great help to Duque. For a moment, great ambition surged into Duque's heart. Fight tycoons. Distribute land. Oh, no. It should be, fight the boss. Rob his mother. At this moment, Duque's mind was unprecedentedly focused, completely from the greed in his heart, from the desire for power, and from the anger of being killed. It was a very magical and very strange slight distortion of the mind. He didn't even notice that a few things flashed in the system notification: detected, greed, in the 7 major sins, activated, you have developed a strong greed for something. Due to your human nature, exploding state. Greed changed from a negative soul state to a positive soul state. Transforming in progress. You have obtained temporary special abilities, plunder, and luck. Plunder, you can obtain more spoils of war from the enemies you kill. Note, this can be beyond the concept of physics. Luck, even living enemies can become your luck. Because they are your potential for advancement. When luck is activated, you will get a higher chance of critical hits and better item drops. Duque didn't notice, he really didn't notice. He only knew that his magic had been activated. Just as the Blade Masters ended their Blade Storm, the Blade Masters were activated. A large amount of water elemental energy rushed into Duke's ice barrier, and with the help of Rapid Avalanche, the place where the Sword Saints were standing was turned into a giant ice ball that was held up by dozens of ice pillars. A translucent ice film sealed off all entrances and exits. Inside, the temperature was dropping rapidly. At the same time, a huge clockwise snowstorm swept up everything inside. The Sword Saints were so depressed that they vomited blood. Of all times, the enemy had unleashed it. That unreasonable ice tornado did not seem like something a sky wizard could do. It was a morning star, no, a radiant moon. They weren't strong in terms of freezing air. The problem was that Duque had placed a large number of palm-sized round ice flakes in the barrier. In terms of freezing air, it was not considered strong, but the problem was that Duque had placed a large number of palm-sized round ice shards inside the barrier, and under the sweeping of the ice storm, these ice shards all became the most lethal blades, crazily cutting their bodies. Under normal circumstances, the Blade Masters could have used all sorts of methods to avoid the attack before the spell was formed. However, Duque just had to wait for them to finish casting their ultimate spells. If it were any other enemy, they could have used Gale Steps to escape. But where could they run to now? Because they were weak, they were sucked into the ice storm and lost control of their own bodies. A Sword Saint was definitely an elite among the Beastmen. Compared to other Beastmen, a Sword Saint's attack power, speed, and agility were all maximized. Chopping down trees and boulders would only require one slash. In comparison, their defense and vitality were at the level of an ordinary human. After casting their ultimate spells, the Blade Master was even weaker than an ordinary human. The ice blades continuously created wounds on their bodies. Very soon, the first Blade Master lost his life. The second, the third, the leading Blade Master's eyes were bloodshot, and he let out a ferocious roar. Loktar Ogre. Even though he was weak, even though his arms were sore and limp, even though every time he swung his blade, he still attacked. Relying on his physique that was stronger than the other Sword Saints, he suddenly stepped on a piece of ice that was already floating in the air. Using the seemingly insignificant reaction force, he shot out of the ice shield's range like a falling meteor. You. Only you, must die. There were countless bloodstains on the Blade Master's face. The wounds caused by the sharp ice blades were already covered with frost. Before he broke through the barrier, the ice blades cut his face again and again. The wounds on his chest were already disorderly, like a piece of rotten meat that was about to be chopped up. There was only a small section of the red flag left on his back. Only the long blade was still astonishingly bright. Only the remaining blood red eye was surging with endless fighting spirit. Duque raised his head and calmly stared at the blade master who risked his life to launch a fatal attack on him. Duque suddenly admired him. Not everyone had the courage to enter the enemy's rear and kill the enemy's leader. Not everyone had the courage to launch a suicidal charge against the enemy when there was still a chance to escape. If he had chosen to escape, perhaps Duque might not have been able to catch him. But after seeing his brother die in battle, he chose to die together with Duque. He was a hero. Unfortunately, the enemy's hero was my enemy's enemy. Flames were not fatal to the Fireblade clan. Duque's ice circuit had been used up in the huge ice storm, so the only thing left was arcane spells. No longer caring about hiding, the 108 hands of magic formed a huge cloister. One end was the Blade Master leader, and the other end was Duque. If he wanted to kill his way to Duque, he had to use the arcane blast from these hands of magic. The dense barrage completely exceeded the limits of what the Blade Master leader could withstand. In less than a tenth of a second, the Blade Master leader was turned into a sieve and fell heavily. Chapter 267. However, the Sword Saint leader was not dead yet. He fell to the ground, and blood flowed out from all the wounds on his body. Soon, the already red floor was dyed red. He raised his head and opened his remaining eye. He opened his mouth with 3 broken fangs. Human mage, the one you killed is the chieftain of the Fireblade clan, Dar Triple Bloodblade. May I know your name? Dar said in the beast man language in a deep voice as he coughed up blood. Duke Marcus, the deputy commander of the Rotterdam Alliance, Duque replied in the human language. So it's you. The great chief of the Fireblade clan slowly closed his eyes. Duque fell silent. A few seconds later, the kings, Windsor, and Gavin Rad, who had come back to their senses, let out angry roars with complicated meanings. Oh, was this the joy of surviving a disaster? Was this a roar praising a hero? Or could it be both? No one knew. Anyway, when the guards on the mountainside nervously rushed over with their swords in hand, and the 2 Kirin Tor counselors rushed over with their lives on the line, what they saw was a bloody and unexpected scene. In the sky, the remains of the Beastman's Sword Saint that had already been cut into pieces fell to the ground. On the ground, the bodies of the king's guards and attendants lay everywhere. Miraculously, not a single truly important person died in this assassination. Perhaps the kings were like Eden, paralyzed and trembling amidst the bloodstains. Perhaps trembling like Tarina's and finding a chair to sit in. Or perhaps they were like Xion and Salas, leaning on their swords and gasping for breath. The guards were in a mess, not knowing what to do. Calm down. The assassins have all been killed by me. The leader was the chieftain of the Fireblade clan, Dar Triple Bloodblade. It was all right now. Don't panic. All the guards formed a defensive formation to protect their king. I'm not sure if there are any assassins left. Pausing for a moment, Duque sat down dejectedly. Krasis, I'll leave this place to you. Inform Lothar that the army will be under his command. Kel Thuzad, I'll have to trouble you to go back and oversee the mages. After arranging everything, Windsor hurried over to support the limp Duque. Master, are you all right? I'm fine. I'm just a little exhausted. Those sword saints are not easy to deal with. Are you hurt? Gavin Rad's face was burning. Just now, he couldn't do anything. Under divine protection, he could not use any weapons. He might be able to use the holy light to heal the kings, but the problem was that if the kings were killed instantly, his holy light would be useless. No. It's just that my magic circuits are a bit messed up. I'll be fine after some rest. Duque looked weak on the outside, but he was so happy that he wanted to jump up and shout, "Yours truly is rich. Yours truly is rich. Yours truly is rich." There was no reason for it. It was because of the few paragraphs in the system prompt. Congratulations, host. You have extracted a mysterious power from the souls of the Sword Saints of the Fireblade clan. You have obtained the secret of Mirror Image. You can now use the advanced version of Mirror Image, True Mirror Image. Your temporary special abilities, Plunder, and Luck, have come into play. You have extracted the true essence of Blade Storm from the soul of Dar Triple Blood Blade. Your Ice Shield and Rapid Avalanche have combined into a new combination skill, Blade Storm. Blade Storm, this is the magical version of the Blade Storm. You can condense the cold aura into countless sharp and frightening blades, slowing down and cutting all enemies within the range of the storm into pieces. The power will increase as your ice circuit is strengthened. However, this is a very extreme magic. As a price, your fully activated ice circuit will be overloaded for a short period of time. You will not be able to use any ice magic for the next 3 days. What is this? This is clearly a killer weapon. Whoosh. I hate that I don't have a high-level ice circuit. Otherwise, the power of this move would be many, many times greater. Thinking of this, Duque felt a little resentful again. The Sun King's arcane fire circuit was indeed amazing, but the problem was that there was no ice magic. Duque rummaged through Mediva's lair for a long time, but he couldn't find an advanced mode for practicing the ice circuit. Involuntarily, Duque thought of Frost Grandpa Antonidas. Antonidas was proficient in all 3 elements, but he preferred to use water and ice magic. Just by looking at his insane number of water elemental summoning spells, one could tell how powerful his ice circuit was. But it doesn't seem to be easy. Duque's mind was a little messy. When he came back to his senses, the entire South Shore, no, the entire Hillsbrad Hills were boiling. We won. Long live Anduin Lothar. Long live Duke Marcus. The huge sound waves formed wave after wave of angry waves, wantonly attacking everyone's eardrums. From the northernmost refugee camp, to the gathering place of the reserve troops, to the vicinity of the headquarters, to the 2 hills that had just experienced a bloody battle, to the beach, and even to the battleship that was on the sea, everyone raised their fists or weapons high in the air. Long spears were like a forest, and swords were like the sea. Thousands of wills converged into one sentence, long live the Alliance. Whose tears were flying? Who was venting their sorrow? The orcs, who had thought that they were invincible, were finally beaten into the hell of losers under the united efforts of the 7 major human kingdoms. Their corpses were thousands of miles away. Those ugly and ferocious faces were stiff because they had lost their lives. Those huge and frightening bodies covered the entire ground of South Shore, the entire beach, and half of the sea. The terrifying legend of the orcs' invincibility was shattered today, right here and now. Long live. The cheers of thousands of soldiers and civilians were like a tsunami, soaring into the sky. Long live. The loud cheers seemed to have brought the entire human world back to the past. Under the banner of Thoradin the Great, everyone was united, and they were invincible. The 4 human kings walked over, and this time, they did not shake hands, but hugged. If not for Duque, they would have all died under the blades of the Fireblade clan, and their noble lives would have become the new legend of the Fireblade clan. Unfortunately, it was because there was no if that the alliance could continue. Old Terenas patted Duque's back and whispered, I owe you one. If Stormwind is unable to restore your kingdom, come to me. I can lend you 100,000 soldiers. Wherever you conquer, that will be your territory. Thank you, Your Majesty Menethil. If that day really comes, I will ask you for this favor. Chapter 268. It had to be said that as the king of the largest human kingdom, Terenas was quite daring. He was far from the muddle-headed old man of his past life. Previously, he said that he would marry Princess Kalia to Duque, but in fact, he was just trying to get something out of it. Everyone knew that Princess Kalia had almost no chance of inheriting the throne, because it was passed down through the male line and not the female line. Arthas was definitely the crown prince. The surrounding kingdoms of Lordaeron were all wary of Lordaeron swallowing them, so there was not much chance for their own crown prince to marry Kalia. Kalia's marriage depended on who could bring the most benefits to Lord Darren. Before this, Tarinas and the other nobles of Lord Darren valued Karazhan, which was in Duque's hands. Unfortunately, Duque refused to take the bait, and instead looked like he was obsessed with Aurelia. Now, Tarinas decided not to mention Kalia anymore. He directly threw out a more important condition. To be honest, if not for the fact that he knew that Lord Darren was likely to die, Duque might have really agreed. Now, it was better to take care of the tribe. If he did not defeat the orcs, all the land and status would be fake. The other three kings were naturally not as rich as Tarinas. Of course, Duque had saved their lives, so they naturally knew how to behave. They all said that they would send gifts once they returned to the kingdom. Hee hee. That's more like it. Otherwise, I swear on my pettiness that if anyone dares to not return the favor, I will immediately make life difficult for your army as the Alliance's deputy commander. Then, you can go cry. Duque laughed in his heart. King Salas Trollbane asked the question that everyone wanted to know. Deputy Commander, can I call you Duque? Of course, Uncle Salas. Duque smiled. Didn't you just, killed? Duque took the initiative to speak. If it was just now, he might not be able to explain how he came back from the dead, and why there was a graveyard next to the command center, and it would only take him a moment to run to the corpse. But now, his mind moved, and the arcane circuit changed. In an instant, 3 identical Duques appeared in front of the 4 kings. It was not as simple as looking exactly the same. They were surprised to find that the 3 Duques were doing different things. One was pointing at the map, one was whistling, and one was taking a sip of the hot black tea that the waiter served. Reginald, give me your sword. Windsor had a general idea of what the dukes were up to. He drew his sword and handed it to the duke who had spoken. In the next second, that duque slashed the other 2 duques with his sword. Not only was blood splattered all over the ground, but there was also a shrill scream. King Eden was so frightened that he became paralyzed again. Then, with a blur, the 2 duques turned into streams of light and disappeared. Duque chuckled. Sorry for scaring everyone. This is the advanced version of the magician's mirror image. I call it true mirror image. Oh, I see. Everyone applauded Duque's high level of magic. And so, just like that, Duque managed to fool them. There was no need for Duque to clean up the battlefield. As the commander-in-chief of the entire battle, Duque had done a lot. When he returned to his house to rest, every soldier and general along the way, regardless of nationality, respected Duque. To be honest, Duque had put in a lot of effort to trick the tribe. Now, Duque just wanted to go back to his house and have a good sleep. At this time, Duque suddenly noticed that in the status bar for Aurelia, there was the word lightly injured. Demon Queen Aurelia is injured? Duque's heart ached for no reason. Even if Aurelia and Queen Sylvanas couldn't take down Lord Howl, they shouldn't be too far off. Maybe it was because of the terrain. Duque blamed himself a little. Realizing that Duque had changed his direction, Gavin Rad was stunned. Sir, where are you going? I'm going to the elves' encampment. When Duke arrived at the place, he saw the elves lying on the ground in a disorderly manner. The elven archers were all tired after the continuous battle. In less than 2 seconds, the elusive Sylvanas appeared. She tilted her head, blinked, and suddenly sighed. Sorry, I was careless this time. But next time, I'll definitely return the favor, sister. After saying that, he disappeared on his own. Queen Sylvanas is indeed a little capricious. Duque sighed inwardly. When Duque walked further inside, he ran into Archbishop Benedict of Stormwind City. Your Grace, Benedict smiled kindly. It's no big deal, but that kind of strain is not the domain of the Holy Light. Perhaps Ms. Windrunner needs to rest for a while. The Archbishop left, and then Gavin Rad whistled. Sir, I understand. I'll wait here. Deep down, Gavin Rad was still a young man of noble birth. Perhaps because of this, his faith wasn't pious enough. As a holy knight, he was always overshadowed by the 4 powerful people chosen by Fao. Duque didn't argue. After all, it was true that he liked Aurelia. Taking a deep breath, Duque walked to the deepest part of the forest. He thought that Aurelia would build a tree house or something, but all Duque saw was a fishnet-shaped hammock. Aurelia was lying on it, her right hand covering her eyes as she swayed. Sorry, little Duque. I made a fool of myself. I thought I could take care of the opponent cleanly. In the end, the 2 of us together could only hold him back. You sisters did a good job. He's Grom Hell Scream. If given enough time, as one of the strongest people in the tribe, he could destroy 3 fleets of Kurdilas. Although I want to say that I feel better, a failure is a failure. It's ugly. You're hurt, Duque said lightly. I'm fine. Then why don't you jump on the ground with your legs? Duque teased. Little guy, are you looking for a beating? Aurelia was a little angry. There's no outsider here. You don't have to hide your injury. When did you become one of us? Aurelia's face suddenly turned red. Just because you went to jail for me? Duque ignored her and went up to Aurelia and reached for her leg. Wait, what are you doing? She pulled out her longbow at lightning speed and blocked in front of Duque's hand. I know a lot about muscle and bone bruises. If you let me handle it, I can let you recover in a week. Or do you want to limp for 3 months? Aurelia thought about it. She wanted to be a cripple for 3 months? Damn it, she was a windrunner. He might as well just kill her and be done with it. Aurelia finally nodded, okay. But don't lie to me. Chapter 269. Aurelia didn't want to believe Miracle Dr. Do at all. When she was fighting with Grom, she could endure the pain with her willpower. But after the battle, she found that she was in terrible pain. What was worse was that she had forgotten how long it had been since she returned empty-handed. After fighting for so long, there wasn't a single decent prey. Those orcs killed on the beach were no different from rabbits on an outing to her. It was rare to see a decent one, but she couldn't take it down. As the heroine of the Troll War and the eldest sister of the Windrunner family, Aurelia couldn't bear to see her 4th brother silently kill 3 figures. Hearing that the internal tribes wouldn't attack South Shore in the short term, Aurelia was prepared to go to Solder Bridge to kill. But the pain in her leg made her realize that if she went with her injury, she would probably kneel if she met someone as ruthless as Grom Hell Scream. Unfortunately, the traditional healing skills of the High Elves and the holy light of humans couldn't do anything to her injury. As a last resort, she could only let Miracle Dr. Do try. Aurelia had already made up her mind. If Miracle Dr. Do was actually Quack Dr. Do, then she wouldn't care if he was the deputy chief of the Alliance or the Hand of God of South Shore. She would make his face feel the same pain as hers. For the time being, it seemed that Miracle Dr. Do was very professional. Without moving closer, Miracle Dr. Do asked, which part of your leg hurts, and how does it hurt? Aurelia jumped down on one leg. Her posture was so light that it was almost impossible to tell that she was injured. But from the slight frown on her face, it could be seen that the Great Demon King was in a bit of pain. Sitting on a shiny rock, the Great Demon King stretched out her right leg and took off her knee-high boots, revealing a smooth and beautiful leg. Aurelia's leg shape was really beautiful. Unlike most high elves' slender legs, her legs were slightly rounder than her brethren's. Perhaps in the eyes of many male compatriots, Savannah's slender and straight legs were the pinnacle of orgasm. But as an old racer who had watched 10 terabytes of racing movies, Miracle Dr. Do thought that these legs were the best. This was what attracted Duque the most. Duque didn't pounce on her. Idiot. If he really did that, he would be instantly killed. Duque had no doubt about this. A minute later, Queen Shi, who was wandering outside the forest, suddenly pricked up her ears. She heard some bad noises. She wasn't sure at first, but her sister did a good job of disrupting the flow of the wind. In just a few seconds, the flow of the wind became chaotic. It was obvious that her elder sister had lost control of the wind. This was an extremely rare occurrence, which only proved one thing: elder sister Aurelia had encountered something that made her confused. Not good. That bastard. Queen Sylvie's figure instantly disappeared on the spot. The closer they got to the small forest, the clearer the sound of the wind became. Ah, no. Ouch. It hurts. Duque, you bastard. You lied to me. Queen Sylvie could recognize Aurelia's voice even if she turned into ashes. No, only the first one was especially painful. I'll be ready in a minute. This was obviously the little bastard's voice. His soothing voice was full of bewitchment. Really? Really? Ah. Bastard, it still hurts, stop. I'm going to kill you. I'm really going to kill you. Can't you be gentle? Then. I'll slow down. It's much better now, I knew it. Cervanus couldn't bear it anymore. She instantly passed the paladin who was guarding outside the small forest and rushed in like lightning. The short sword at her waist popped into her hand, revealing a fierce edge. Duque. You bastard. What did you do to my sister? Cervanus regretted it a little as soon as she finished drinking. What came into view was a rather awkward scene. Aurelia was blushing and lying on a round stone, while Duque was holding Aurelia's right foot and his right hand was pressing on her forefoot. Although their thighs were in a split position, it was a little, very ambiguous. At least their clothes were intact. Looking at Queen Cervanus' sword, Duque was dumbfounded. Aurelia reacted quickly and pointed at her calf. Sister, look, the bulge here is gone. Duque is actually. Now it was Cervanus's turn to blush. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. The next moment, her whole body turned into a green stream of light and instantly disappeared. Demon Queen Aurelia glared at Duque. Put down my foot. The treatment isn't over yet. If you let go now, your tendons will shrink back. Aurelia blushed and gritted her teeth. Hurry up. Yes. Back to 3 minutes ago, Duque asked Aurelia where it hurt. My knee, and here. Aurelia pointed at her calf, where there was an obvious bulge. Duque was embarrassed. This, sister, you haven't tried it for so long. Cramps? Cramps? What is cramps? Demon Queen Aurelia, who had never been defeated in thousands of years, was as cute as a little girl at the moment. You've never tried it when you're exhausted and very tired, and then accidentally, the tendons here contracted violently and curled up into a ball. This. I've never tried it. I can kill hundreds of trolls without taking a breather. Duque was speechless. Then, Duque gently touched the Demon Queen's knee and asked her what she did when she got hurt. Duque was confident. Cruciate ligament strain and cramps. The rarest thing is that you didn't pull your tendons back after having cramps for so long. Cruciate ligament strain. Before Duque traveled to this world, many soccer players suffered from this kind of injury. It was either because the frequency of the leg movement was too high, and the ligaments could not bear the load, or because they were too tired, causing the two cruciate ligaments in the knee to strain. Of course, there was a more serious injury in the same position called cruciate ligament tear. That would require surgery. As a member of the High Elf Ranger family, the Windrunner family was really gifted in terms of physical fitness. Perhaps, if she hadn't met an opponent like Master Roar, Aurelia would never have hurt her knee. In fact, after the Holy Light treatment, the strain had basically recovered. The Holy Light itself would promote the healing of the wound. After Duque used the system elf to scan it carefully and make sure that it was fine, he helped Aurelia stretch her tendons. A normal human's tendons were a little short. A 90-degree spread of the leg and a forward roll of the foot was enough. The problem was that the Demon Queen's tendons were quite soft and long. It took a full 150 degrees to pull the sore spot. As a result, He had just forced the demon queen to stretch her tendons when Queen Sylvie arrived with her sword. Duque was dumbfounded. Chapter 270. Little bastard. You made my sister misunderstand so much. I'm going to kill you. I'm definitely going to kill you. Aurelia flew into a rage out of humiliation. Her higel breasts heaved up and down. The blind Duque did not even dare to look at her. Angry women were the most unreasonable. Trying to reason with her was stupid. Duque activated his ultimate skill, universal attention diversion technique. Does your calf still hurt? Dr. Du's right hand was still holding onto Aurelia's forefoot. His left hand moved along the tendons of her calf. A numb feeling came from her calf. It was like an electric current, striking Aurelia's mind in waves. That strange feeling made the great demon king quiver. It doesn't seem to hurt much anymore, the great demon king answered truthfully. That's good. Dr. Du put down Aurelia's leg with a serious face. Then, he took out a few cow tendons from his storage bag. In front of Aurelia, he cut them into thin strands and made them into something similar to a knee pad. He stuck it on Aurelia's knee. Then, Duque used ice magic to create ice particles. He put them into an oiled paper bag and placed them on Aurelia's knee. Hiss, so cold. This is called ice compress. Every morning, noon, afternoon, evening, and before bed, apply ice particles 5 times a day. It will speed up the healing of your knee injury, Dr. Du said seriously. Ice compress had a good effect on knee injuries and knee ligament injuries. Don't ask Duque how he knew. Before he transmigrated, there was an animal in Duque's dormitory who was on the football team. That guy died heroically. Then, Duque understood. Are these measures really useful? Aurelia hesitated. Dr. Du revealed a sincere smile. Persist for 3 days. If there's no effect, you're welcome to use a knife to chop me. After Dr. Du finished his treatment, he left in a carefree manner. Aurelia sat on the big rock in a daze for a long time before she suddenly came to her senses. Hey, I seemed to be angry just now. What was I angry about? When the ice melted and the numbness passed, she moved her legs and found that the pain in her knees had lessened a lot. Windrunner specialized in agility. Unlike those orc warriors who were used to taking hits head-on and shouting, "Scars are the orcs' medals," they were very clear and sensitive to every change in their bodies. Even if she didn't want to admit it, Aurelia had to admit that her injuries had indeed lightened a lot. Then, in the afternoon, a problem arose. It was November. Even though it was already autumn, where could she find ice? There were no mages to make ice. The only place with ice was the Atlank Mountains over 100 kilometers away. Was she supposed to abandon her team and run to Alterac to recuperate? Or did she make her sister run errands 5 times a day? There were many mages among the High Elves, but this was the Windrunners' ranger team. Where could she find a mage? She wasn't familiar with any human mages. In the end, when Aurelia was about to bite the bullet and look for Duque's personal maid, Vanessa, came. As if she had calculated the distance, the ice did not melt when Vanessa arrived. Vanessa Van Cleve did not give Aurelia a good look. Our master is very busy. For the sake of your injury, I suggest you live closer to him. For some reason, Vanessa had a slight hostility towards Aurelia. Aurelia would not really argue with a minor, so she silently accepted the ice. Duque was really busy. The so-called alliance was just a grassroots team at the moment. Although Lothar seemed to follow Lang and was highly educated, his internal affairs were actually zero. Even though Terenas was a good person and lent Duque 15 internal affairs officers, in fact, all the logistics were still gathered to Duque and decided by the deputy chief commander, Duque. Lothar? Even if Lothar had to be a human stamping machine, Duque would not let Lothar have it easy. Good brothers, even if they fart under the blanket, they will die together. How can I be the only one busy? Hee hee. So, Lothar was in a difficult situation. Apart from stamping, he was also sent by Duque to various legions to visit the wounded and the families of the dead. The victory in South Shore this time definitely disrupted the orcs' pace of attack. For a long time, there was no report of the orc laborers building new ships in large quantities. Both the Alliance and the Horde knew that it was impossible to maintain the offensive in the coming winter. This was the last battle before winter. If the Horde successfully landed on the Hillsbrad Hills, then the Alliance would not have a good time this winter. This was because the Dalagen, Gilness, Alterac, and Torrentberg would all be under the threat of the orcs' attack. On the contrary, the Alliance won a great victory and could at least have a more stable winter. The statistics from this battle were, in the naval battle, more than 1,500 small and medium-sized transport ships were destroyed, and 80 large transport ships with 1,000 people were destroyed. A conservative estimate was about 100,000 Horde people died, but the composition was unknown. In the beach battle, the Horde lost 67,000 laborers and 59,000 official soldiers. Among them, the Warsong tribe lost more than 15,000 people. However, most of the strongest Warsong tribe's main force retreated through the eastern beach. 200,000 Horde people, even the worthless laborers, probably accounted for more than 60% of them. This was a shocking victory no matter how one looked at it. Comparatively, the human side suffered very few losses. The heaviest casualties were on the western coast, where the Horde mainly attacked. The Lordaeron people paid a heavy price for this, which was 15,000 deaths. The eastern hill of the Stormwind Kingdom was much better, but 7,000 people had died in battle. Together with other battle losses, the Alliance lost more than 31,000 people, and nearly 20,000 wounded soldiers were permanently out of the battle line. What was more disgusting was that the orcs were a bunch of poor bastards, and there were no spoils of war to speak of. They really did not get any tangible benefits even if they won. When Duque was disposing of the corpses, he ordered them to be pushed into the sea, so that the Murlocs, who had also lost a lot but had no fear of meat, could have a good meal. This might have stimulated the Murlocs to have fertility activities. The only good thing was that the Horde's crazy attack proved the orcs' ambition to occupy the whole world. At the same time, the display of more than 10,000 orc heads in each capital gave every kingdom in the Alliance enough capital to declare this a great victory. Winter was coming, and the armies in battle were simply black holes that devoured food. Duque sent almost all the troops of the kingdoms back to their own countries. Basically, the entire South Shore defense line was left with the troops of Stormwind City and Mograine's army, plus the Silver Hand and a Lordaeron cavalry regiment. Of course, the elves were an exception. In the autumn wind that was gradually becoming cold, Duque stood against the wind. Looks like we can have a stable winter. Chapter 271. It was an autumn night at the end of November. Lying on a self-made beach chair, Duque looked up at the starry Azeroth sky and was speechless for a long time. This was a starry sky that was completely different from Earth's. As a child in a big city, he had never seen such a beautiful starry sky. He remembered that even at night, the stars in the sky were mostly dim. Stars of the 0 class were the brightest, and stars of the 6th class and above were almost invisible to the naked eye. In a city surrounded by exhaust gas and atmospheric pollutants, stars of at least the 3rd class could be seen. The starry sky of Azeroth was clean and clear. Although the constellations written by Earthlings based on Earth's position were completely useless here, the stars shone brightly here, and it was beautiful. The stars twinkled. Some starlight went out, and some new stars lit up, like lights in the mortal world. There was a small balcony on the roof of the wooden house that Duke had ordered people to build for him. There was only enough space for a single bed. This was originally Duke's private space, but unfortunately, half of it had been occupied by the Great Demon King. At first, Aurelia only came to get ice for her feet, but later she became more casual. In particular, the iced okra made by Duque with wasabi sauce became one of the Great Demon King's favorites. A strange and natural taste. This was Aurelia's evaluation of the novel food of the transmigrator. Aurelia looked up at the starry sky. Under the moonlight, her beautiful face seemed to sparkle. The brilliance of the stars and the moon outlined the charming arc of her face, shining on her ivory white skin, and finally, it seemed that all the starlight gathered into her emerald green eyes. She looked at the starry sky, a little fascinated. Ah, it seems that it feels good to look at the starry sky from a place other than Kuel Salis, Aurelia exclaimed. Although he wanted to complain that it was not the same starry sky, Duque finally changed his words. Don't you need to go back in winter? Aurelia combed her bright blonde hair. It's been thousands of years. I'm used to the scenery of my hometown. It's not bad to go out for a few years occasionally. Unless the Sun King or the Parliament gives the order to give up the covenant with Thoradin the Great, I'll have to play outside for at least a few years. The elves, who possessed eternal lifespans, were truly indifferent to the concept of time. It was no wonder that they had always kept their distance from short-lived races. However, if the general trend of history did not change, it would not be long before the elves lost their eternal lives. Duque did not dare to guarantee anything. The river of fate had long been shattered by Duque. Due to his interference in fate, if the First Orc War ended with the fall of Stormwind City, it would at least be in line with the historical ending. Now, in this World War II, Duque felt that he had lost most of his prophetic abilities. Even though he had threatened the Berev family that the horde would land from the hinterlands, the Berev family did not believe him. In fact, it was almost impossible to do. This meant that the tribe's transport fleet had to pass through the narrow strait between the northern and southern continents. After all, this strait was over 100 meters high, and under Duke's strong suggestion, King Salas had already ordered the engineers of Fort Riptide to build a new batch of catapults along the cliffs on the north side of the strait. The new militia would be in charge of monitoring the entire strait. As long as the tribe's transport ships dared to pass, Duque was willing to bet that the entire tribe's fleet would sink in the strait, blocking the strait. The scene would be spectacular. It was the same for the coast of the Hillsbrad Hills. Previously, Duque was just bullying the enemy, but not now. Before the last bunch of ripe wheat was harvested in the Hillsbrad Hills, Duque had already mobilized the idle people of Stormwind City to start building forts along the entire coastline. The kingdom will not be able to recover in the next 2 to 3 years. In order to ensure the safety of our temporary residents, please do your best to help. The refugees still had lingering fears from the war less than a week ago. For safety, and for the extra food rationed in Duque's work for relief plan, the people sold their labor at a very low price. Under the command of Naga, the Murlocs were building wooden stakes in the shallow waters of the entire coast, greatly reducing the area that could be landed. Moreover, Duque's Murlocs had begun to set up camp in the shallow waters of the western side of Tangarok. After this winter, if the tribe dared to attack again, they would have to face a line of defense that was as hard as a meat grinder. Hey, which direction will the tribe attack from next? Aurelia asked Duque. To be honest, I don't know. In principle, I have already blocked all 3 possible directions of attack. Oh. Unless the tribe builds their ships from the Swamp of Sorrows in the southwest of the southern continent more than 2,000 nautical miles away, as long as they set off from the wetlands opposite South Shore, they can either attack South Shore, cross the strait and Solder Bridge. The last route is to go west around the cape opposite Gilness, and then north to the North Stream coast or the South Stream coast. These 3 routes must be paved with the blood of the orcs. Why can't they conquer the sea route more than 2,000 nautical miles away? Aurelia asked. Because. Duque deliberately kept her in suspense. He took out a piece of okra from the ice bucket, dipped it in soy sauce and wasabi, and was about to put it in his mouth. Who knew that Aurelia would come to snatch the okra? Well, her cherry lips bit down on Duque's hand. Originally, Duque vowed to die rather than submit, but when the great demon king snatched the food, Mount Hygel happened to swing in front of Duque's eyes unconsciously. And then Mr. Okra died in battle. Ugh, you have big breasts, you're ruthless. Aurelia, the cute girl, did not seem to realize how lethal her action was to a little boy who was about to lose his Kirin arm. She even raised her nose proudly. Hee hee. Because of what? Because there's a giant whirlpool in the west of the southern continent. Not to mention the orc ships, even the ships of cultivation would have sunk. Duke was a little stunned as he answered. Does that mean that the horde can't even find a place to land? If the horde doesn't mind setting off from the Gulf of Paladin in the wetlands and being bled all the way to the South Stream coast, they can still land. But how effective it will be is another matter. Duke had completely lost his foresight on how the horde would land. In the original history, the horde landed on a large scale and succeeded in one go. They mobilized Lothar's army in the Hillsbrad Hills. Lothar was forced to fight a field battle with the horde. The result was a draw. Orgrim led the horde's army to the hinterlands in the northeast, and then went all the way to the High Elves in the north. Now, it was time to see what Orgrim would do. Chapter 272. Orgrim was annoyed. The failure to cross the sea to attack South Shore was a humiliation in his history as a great chief. Even though everyone knew that this was only one of Orgrim's larger-scale probing attacks, it was impossible for them to win. This was because Jianghu's 25,000 warriors were the only ones who had participated in the battle. The rest of the warriors were mostly from the smaller clans. But a failure was a failure. The simple and violent beastmen had no concept of feints. Most of them thought that Stormwind City was taken by the Blackhand Great Chief, and that Orgrim had just returned to pick up an empty city. Iron Furnace Castle, which was supposed to be Orgrim's victory, was not completely conquered. It wasn't that Kilrog Deadeye's Bloodloop clan didn't work hard, but when they reached the gates of Iron Furnace Castle, the Bloodloop clan's warriors were stuck. No beastman could withstand that kind of three-dimensional, all-encompassing cannon fodder attack. Many times, a hole suddenly appeared in the mountain wall, and fatal shots, guns, or even cannons would shoot out from inside. His greatest achievement was pushing through the gates and almost entering the dwarves' core area. Then, the warriors that killed their way in were met with the dwarves' steam tanks and various cannons. Those beastman warriors were killed just like that. This had nothing to do with courage, it was purely a matter of battle philosophy. Just now, news came that Orgrim had failed again. The scouting fleet that came back from the Swamp of Sorrows was that the fleet that he had painstakingly built was almost completely annihilated, and not a single ship could return. From the shore to the deepest part of the sea, a huge whirlpool that spanned the entire area? Orgrim felt that the beastman's luck had run out, even though he didn't really believe it. In the past, he might have been able to recite the blessings of his ancestors. However, after almost all the orc shamans abandoned their traditions and changed from shaman to warlock, he had never heard of any warlock who could still sense the call of Mother Earth. What Orgrim had to face was that winter was coming. Before the end of this winter, he might not be able to organize a proper battle across the sea. Wetlands, as the name suggested, was an area formed by a large number of swamps and shallow puddles. Spending the winter here was a nightmare. Beastmen were hard-working, but given a choice, no one would be willing to spend the winter in such a wet and cold place. Not long after Orgrim became the great chief, his reputation started to show. He did not have enough confidence to subdue those hot-tempered chiefs. Moreover, the requirements seemed so reasonable. We are willing to fight to the death for our tribe. But at least give us a peaceful winter. No clan would choose to start a war in winter unless it was a disaster that would wipe out the entire clan. We have conquered an entire continent. The warriors of the tribe are very tired, and winter is the season to produce the next generation of warriors. I can't oppose this tradition. What are the orcs doing in the winter? As long as there was enough food, the beastmen would roast themselves over a fire, eat the food that had been stored, and carry the female beastmen to give birth to the little beastmen. This was a tradition that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. Orgrim reluctantly agreed to withdraw the army to the south, to the more comfortable Loch Moden area. In order to appease his Blackrock tribe, he even moved most of them back to the Elven Forest. Of course, the Blackrock tribe was happy to travel for half a month back to this territory that they had sacrificed more than 100,000 of their kind to conquer. After all, it was warmer there, and Duque did not burn all of the forest. There were still many trees that could be used as charcoal to keep them warm during the winter. Orgrim's only consolation was that his new assistant, the chief of the Dragon Maw tribe and shaman Zulu Sid, brought him that news, as well as his biggest worry, Ghoul Dan was injured. He went to see Ghoul Dan yesterday. The former ruler of the tribe was not in good condition. Apologies, Chief. The humans have a very powerful mage. Even though I heavily injured him, I won't be able to work for the tribe for a long time. As he spoke, Ghoul Dan's breath was weak, and his shoulder was completely covered in ice. Or rather, half of his body was stuck in a block of ice. Orgrim squinted his eyes. He had seen human ice magic before, but this was the first time he had seen such a terrifying one. An icicle had pierced through Ghoul Dan's shoulder. With the wound as the center, there was a terrifying cold energy that didn't dissipate. Orgrim roughly used Hammer of Destruction to smash away half of the ice, but it was useless. The ice seemed to be like a slime that could grow infinitely, and in just a few seconds, it returned to its original state. Orgrim furrowed his brows. This is a mysterious energy method of humans called Arcane Circuit. That powerful mage injected a portion of his power into my body, and it formed an independent circuit. Before I destroy this power, my injury will not heal. Orgrim nodded. Rest well. Orgrim left after saying this. He did not even ask Ghoul Dan to provide more death knights. Who knew that as soon as Orgrim left, Ghoul Dan would sneer. In front of his confidant, the twin-headed ogre warlock Google, the ice on his shoulder shattered with a loud bang. The seemingly extremely cold and powerful icicle was now stuck in Ghoul Dan's shoulder like a small piece of chopstick. Orgrim, you fool who doesn't know what power is. Very well, go back to your war. I still have other things to do. Because of your relief, I will have more freedom to focus on these things. I will continue to play the role of a loyal warlock who was wounded for the glory of the tribe. But I swear, this will not be forever. Soon I will get what I seek, and then you and the tribe will disappear from my sight forever. I will set up a new force to replace you, a force that is only loyal to me, and then I will transform the world according to my plan. Ha 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 ha. Ghoul Dan laughed wildly. His laughter greatly encouraged the remaining warlocks of the Shadow Council. After Orgrim left, he went straight to the Dragon's Roar tribe's encampment with his guards. Next to the Patriarch's tent, Orgrim saw a thin and wrinkled old beast man, but there was still a pair of sharp brownish-red eyes under his gray and tattered braid. Zulu hid. Orgrim shouted. The old beastman shaman looked towards the source of the voice and found that it was the great tribal chief calling his name. He immediately stood up and pushed away the wine glass and large plate placed in front of him. Chapter 273. Doomhammer. Unlike Ghoul Dan's humility, Zulud didn't bow, and Orgrim didn't mind either. After all, Zulud was a tribal chief, the leader of the Dragon Maw tribe. He was also a shaman, the only shaman who accompanied his tribe after coming to this world. Furthermore, Orgrim felt more comfortable talking to a typical beast man like him. It was because of the shaman's strange prophecy, or rather, the things he could provide that Orgrim was very interested in. How's that going? Doomhammer didn't bother with pleasantries and directly took the wine cup Zulud handed over. The wine inside was very good, and the human blood that flowed into the cup made it even more delicious. It's done. Great chief. Zulud opened his smelly mouth and let out a smile that seemed like a declaration of victory. Take me to see it. Now. Immediately. Orgrim couldn't wait any longer. Of the two attacks, one was a complete defeat, and the other was a complete failure. Orgrim deeply felt the bottleneck of the beastmen. As the most knowledgeable beastman, and also the one with the highest position, Orgrim knew that the era of the beastmen conquering the world was over. Understood. Please follow me. Zulud called for Orgrim to mount his warg. Not long after, they arrived at the southeast side of the wetlands. This place was called Grimbader, as the dwarves called it. It used to be a dwarven stronghold, but now it belonged to the Dragon Maw tribe. While the rooms in the dwarven stronghold were large enough for the dwarves, it wasn't friendly to most of the beast men. Zulud had most of his tribesmen who had nothing better to do expand this place. The stronghold was well equipped, and it was built inside the mountains, making it easy to defend. This was very important because there was a killing machine here that could break through the damned defenses of the humans. Zulud brought the great chief and his guards deeper into the stronghold, and finally arrived in front of a large iron gate. One could imagine that behind the gate was a vast underground hall. What's inside? You told me a few weeks ago that you sensed an incomparably powerful mysterious force that could change the entire situation. Is this thing inside now? Yes, my great chieftain. I hope the thing inside has that value. Do you know? Zulu hid, for the sake of that illusory image of yours, I sent you 30,000 elite orcs as a search team and 100,000 laborers as excavators. If it weren't for you, I would have gone all out to attack South Shore. Now, if you disappoint me, I don't mind showing you the wrath of the great chief. Orgrim raised the hammer of destruction in his hand and made a threatening declaration. You won't be disappointed, great chief. Zuluhid wrinkled his nose and revealed a rough smile. At this moment, one of Orgrim's guards tried to touch the handle of the gate. Wait! The Dragonmaw tribe's chief issued a stern warning. He took out a strange thing from a large bag on his waist. It was a huge and ordinary-looking golden disc. He raised the disc high up in the air. I am the master of Demon's Soul, and I order you to appear in the name of my master. Guardian. It was hard to tell if Zuluhid was using the shaman's power or not. In any case, in the eyes of the great tribal chief and the dozens of orc guards, they could only see countless sparks surging from the huge iron gate, gathering into a figure in the void in front of the iron gate. The figure gradually became clearer. It was a tall and strong humanoid figure wearing unfamiliar bone armor. Its top looked like a demon's skull that had lost its skin and flesh, but it was burning with flames. Its eyes were balls of black flames. This strange existence floated in front of them. It was as tall as the orcs, but it looked sluggish. It emitted an indescribable power and a sense of vigilance. We want to go in. Zulud said as he raised the demon's soul in front of him and pointed at Orgrim and his guards. He was telling it that we included those creatures. The strange existence nodded, turned into countless sparks again, and disappeared in front of the gate. The Dragonmaw tribe's chief nodded to his great chief, indicating that they could enter. What will happen if we barge in? Orgrim asked. Very bad. That time, a messenger came with your message. He didn't wait for me to remove the guard before rushing in. Then, that guard appeared out of nowhere and grabbed that idiot's head with its huge, burning hand. Then, that idiot's head turned to ash. Orgrim could almost imagine a huge flaming claw grabbing the careless beastman's head, flames coming out of his orifices. A few seconds later, the beastman stopped screaming, and his body went limp as his head turned into a pile of ash. Fortunately, Zuluhid was a pure orc, and not a schemer like Ghoul Dan who made Orgrim uncomfortable all day long. Fortunately, Ghoul Dan was heavily injured. The huge iron gate opened with a squeak. Inside, there were dozens of heavy metal chains that had been heated red by the high temperature and were attached to the wall. Oddly enough, Orgrim thought that he would see a gigantic creature cramming the entire cave. In the end, at the end of the magical chain that got thinner and thinner as it got closer to the center of the room, was a human female. From the point of view of the entrance, her face was pressed against the ground, and she was lying on her side with her head facing the innermost part of the cave. She was wearing a crimson-red gauntlet and leggings with golden edges, and a sexy bikini battle armor. As a woman, she was very beautiful. She had a head of fiery red hair and a body that was incomparably seductive in the eyes of humans. He didn't know if it was because of comfort or despair, but Orgrim could clearly feel that she was actually awake, but she was lying there just like that. Orgrim was enraged. He pointed at the plump breasts and slender waist with his thick finger and cursed at Zuluhid, "You idiot, you're attracted by these shriveled breasts and slender waist? Bastard. I don't care which human queen or princess she is." Zuluhid, you're dead. At this moment, Zuluhid smiled mysteriously and knocked on the disc in his hand. In the next moment, the seemingly human woman and the chain rapidly grew in size together. A few seconds later, Orgrim recovered from his shock. Ha ha ha. Well done, Zuluhid. Chapter 274. The threat of the horde had not disappeared. The Alliance and the horde were like two giant beasts fighting to the death. They had to stop fighting in the face of the weather and lick their wounds. The refugees from the Stormwind Kingdom who were stranded in the Hillsbrad Hills received a batch of crucial summer food, but it was not enough, so Duke went to the Barav family for this. Duque did not see Duke Barav. The Duke had gone to Alterac. Unexpectedly, Janice, who met Duque on behalf of the Duke, agreed to Duque's request to buy rations. No problem. The people of Stormwind have made outstanding contributions to the resistance against the horde. It is only right for the Barav family to do something for them. How about 10,000 tons of wheat this year? According to the previous price. This time, it was Duque's turn to be surprised. 5,000 tons back then was a 30% premium. According to the previous price, it sounded like the Barav family was still a scam. But this was not the time. The battle in South Shore made the entire northern continent realize that the threat of the orcs was close at hand. Those terrifying green-skinned beasts wanted to slaughter all the humans in the world. As a result, the price of everything related to the people's lives soared. Even if the Alliance used a great victory to prove that they had the ability to defeat the horde invasion. The various kingdoms also introduced a lot of policies to suppress the skyrocketing prices, but the most important thing was that the price of grain still increased by more than 2.5 times. Selling at the previous price wasn't a scam, it was a huge sale. Duque was moved. This really. I thank you on behalf of the people of Stormwind. No need to thank me. Helping the people of Stormwind is helping the Alliance and Alterac. The Duchess smiled kindly. Yes, I heard that your private army's equipment isn't enough. Is there anything the Barav family can help with? In a state of war, the price of weapons, food, soldiers, and everything related to war soared. Duque's luxury goods business had long been stagnant. If it wasn't for the fact that he had gathered enough weapons and equipment before the war, Duque's so-called private army would have to be equipped with a bamboo spear. Of course, everyone lacked weapons, especially after losing their own country. Even if Duque opened a blacksmith shop in the refugee camp north of South Shore, workers and raw materials were still scarce. Obviously, the Barav family did not lack these things. I'll be honest with you. Whether it's Stormwind or my private army, they all need it. May I ask, what do I have to pay for this? Mrs. Janice, Duke asked politely. As a testament to the friendship between the Barav family and the Marcus family, these small gifts are not worth mentioning. If I must say what I personally wish for, could I ask you, Duque, to teach my daughter the secret of multicast? Duque was stunned, then he smiled. The best way to deepen the relationship between nobles was through marriage. Mrs. Janice was very clever. If it was the Duque of the past, a duke and a duke's daughter would definitely be a good match. Now, Duque was the rising star of the Rotterdam Alliance, the Alliance's deputy commander, and he had saved 5 kings and won the Battle of South Shore. Duque was almost synonymous with miracles. Princess Kalia of Rotterdam and many other princesses were almost at Duque's disposal. If he proposed a marriage, it would only be humiliating for the Barav family. On the other hand, the Barav family urgently needed a backup. Alterac was too weak. Even if they entered a state of war, the entire Alterac family only had a little more than 30,000 soldiers, including 20,000 farmers. These farmers who had just washed their feet and started working in the fields were completely useless in terms of morale and training. Putting aside the ambitious Rotterdam Kingdom, the wandering Stormwind Kingdom was an ideal partner to work with. Perhaps the refugees of Stormwind would stay near South Shore for a long time, but as long as the 7 human kingdoms still existed, and as long as the Alliance existed, Stormwind would definitely not dare to take the risk of being criticized by the world and covet Alterac's land. In a roundabout way to save the country, the Barav family proposed to let Alucia become Duque's disciple. In Azeroth, although there was no saying that a teacher for a day was a father for life, the relationship between a teacher and a student was still very important. If it wasn't for national righteousness, or the rise and fall of a country, it would be shameful for the entire human kingdom to betray and kill one's teacher. Even if it was in the name of righteousness, it was not something to be proud of. This was also why in the original history, Khadgar was criticized by many for killing Medivh for the sake of the world. Duque thought for a while. I now have the responsibility of the Alliance's deputy commander. I may not have much time to teach Miss Alucia. At this point, Duchess Janice was so nervous that her heart almost jumped out of her throat. This was how relationships were. If one did not advance, they would fall back. It was very difficult to maintain a stalemate. Moreover, Stormwind had already gained a foothold. The Barav family, which was weaker in terms of military strength, needed help from Duque and Stormwind in order to deal with the threat of the orcs. Things were different now. The current Duque and Stormwind could completely ignore Alterac and the Barav family. Not befriending the Barav family would do Duque no good, nor would it do him any harm. If he considered the destruction of the Barav family in the future, Duque really did not need to save this family. At this moment, the faces of the undead Janice and Alucia from Scholomance that appeared in Duque's mind overlapped with the Janice in front of him. For some reason, he suddenly sympathized with the Barav family. He had fought for so long just so that he would not become a ghoul. It was as if Duque could see the Alucia Barav of the future, standing among a group of necromancers. Even though her family was not far away, she could only wait for the Lich King to summon her to the holy land of the undead scourge. Mrs. Janice dissected the corpses one after another. At that time, she was no longer the elegant and beautiful mistress of the Barav family. In her crazy eyes, those soulless zombies were her only friends. Since the start of the First War, too many kingdoms and families had been destroyed by the 3 consecutive wars. Duque was not a savior. He could not save everyone. However, since this tragedy was happening right in front of his eyes, he might as well save them. Thinking of this, Duque changed the topic. However, if the Barav family does not mind, I am willing to discuss the mysteries of magic with Miss Alucia. At this moment, Janice finally let out a sigh of relief. Chapter 275. For Duque, it was just a convenience, but for the Barav family, it had a completely different meaning. As if seeing through what Duque wanted the most, after confirming their close alliance, Lady Janice threw out her ultimate trump card. It's Alucia's honor to study the mysteries of magic with you, Duque. I'll write a letter now. Please pass it to Alucia when you go to the Dalajan. Oh. Duque was curious. Madam, you know that I'm going to the Dalajan? Lady Janice showed a proud expression. I heard that you used ice spells to kill more than a dozen powerful orc assassins in the command center and saved 4 kings. Duque tilted his head. That's right. I only know that if it was my senior brother Antonidas, even when he was still a sky mage, he would not have let the last assassin break through his ice domain. Even if he was the chief of a tribe. Why do you say that? Although he had guessed Janice's intentions, Duque still asked. Because at that time, he had a top-level, ice circuit, model more than you did. Lady Janice smiled like a flower, and her posture as she took a sip of black tea was extremely elegant. Duque seemed to see an equally elegant fox tail wagging behind her. This was where Janice was smart. From the perspective of forming an alliance or deepening friendship, the conditions she gave Duque before could not be considered generous or costly. She and the Barav family certainly hoped to have Duque as external aid, but at this time, it seemed that the Barav family did not necessarily need Duque's support. To some extent, this was also a test. If Duque refused, then naturally, the top-level, ice circuit, model would not have anything to do with Duque. If Duque agreed like this, it would be a pleasant surprise. Janice did not add this bargaining chip when she made the request, because she did not want this to become a pure transaction. In exchange for the Barav family's gift, he wouldn't help the Barav family at a critical moment. After figuring this out, Duque didn't have any ill feelings towards Janice. This kind of, if you respect me, I'll respect you tenfold, method. Duque didn't hate it. Moreover, Lady Janice was smart enough to figure out what he wanted. She was indeed quite intelligent. I told senior brother Antonidas long ago that I wanted him to pass the ice circuit to Alucia. As half of Alucia's master, I think you, Duque, should help Alucia with her research. Janice summoned her servant and wrote a letter in her own handwriting, handing it to Duque. Thank you so much, madam. Just like that, Duque brought Janice's handwritten letter to the Dalijan. It was different from the last time he came in the middle of the night. This time, although Duque took advantage of this rare free time to pay a visit of a more personal nature, Duque's status was completely different now. Previously, Duque's magic had not been proven to the 5 northern countries. Now, Duque was a big shot who had truly secured the position of the deputy commander of the alliance. Therefore, the person who led the team to receive Duque was Prince Kale, that's one of the 6-member council members who remained in the Dalijan. Welcome, Commander Marcus. At this time, Kale, was still the role model of the High Elf. He was gentle and elegant, and he gave off a feeling of a spring breeze to anyone he met. Moreover, he deliberately hid the word deputy, to make him appear more mature. Everyone liked to be flattered. Kale, that's the name, which seemed to have slipped out, was actually a slightly exaggerated compliment. Hee, when you say that, I almost think that Commander Lothar is here, Duque replied without a trace. There's no need to be humble. Everyone knows your contributions to the alliance. Seeing that Duque was not snubbed, Kale, did not deliberately sow discord between Duque and Lothar. He changed the topic and said, actually, many mages in the Dalijan are fascinated by your spellcasting skills. If you have time to come to the Dalijan to teach or hold seminars, I'm sure many mages will join the royal mages in Stormwind because of your reputation. Oh. It's not good for me to poach mages in the Dalijan like this, right? Duque was slightly tempted. In the Dalijan, all mages are equal and free. Mystics pay attention to fair trade. In order to explore a more profound world of magic, so what if I give up a moment of freedom? Just as everyone can freely choose whether to join the Dalijan's direct mages, the Dalijan will not mind free mages joining Stormwind or becoming your followers, Your Excellency. How about it? Do you want to consider it? If Kale, flattery at the beginning had gone too far, then this time, Kale, proposal could be said to be a tailor-made and wonderful proposal. It immediately touched Duque's heart. Abducting mages for free. He did not need to cultivate them himself. He could just take away a semi-finished product and train them himself for 1.5 years. When the time came, even if they were not flashy enough, they could still be scary. Duque was really tempted. This time, Duque was sincerely grateful to Kale, Kai. Sorry, Kale, thank you very much. I think I'll find some time. Before that, I want to see Antonidas first. Please follow me. Kale, finally confirmed that he had redeemed the little bit of unhappiness at the beginning and had successfully gained Duque's favor. It was reasonable to say that as the Prince of the High Elves, Kale, could completely ignore Duque on the surface. But one should not forget why Kale, had come to the Dalijan to study and then stayed for so many years. He could not return to Kuel Salis even though he was about to go moldy. The story behind this was the power struggle between his father, the Sun King, and the Silvermoon Council. Having seen the customs of the two worlds, Kale, had long become extremely mature. In particular, there was no harm in having a good relationship with Duque, the powerful deputy commander of the alliance. Moreover, he and Duque also had a strange sense of closeness. It was a kind of closeness that seemed to come from the same source. Walking on the streets of the Dalijan, Duque felt very strange. This was a Dalijan that had not been destroyed. Although it was not as wonderful as the Dalijan that floated in the air in the future and was known as the City in the Sky. Now, this Dalijan was even bigger and more historical. This wonderful city located south of Lake Lordamir was a combination of wisdom, power, grandeur, beauty, art, and mystery. It was the brightest pearl of the entire continent and even the entire world. Once, almost all the human mages in the world studied the magic they learned from the high elves here. And the mysterious and elegant white towers all over the city showed the wisdom, ambition, status, and power of the mages. If Duque had not inherited Karazhan, perhaps Duque would have considered building a mage tower here. As Kale, that's led the way, he introduced everything here to Duque. At this moment, a very beautiful blonde girl came in front of Duque. "Hello, Your Excellency Sky Mage Duke Marcus. I am Jaina Proudmoore." Chapter 276. In the world of Azeroth, there were two heroines that no one could avoid. The Alliance's Jaina. The Horde's Sylvanas. In the world's crisis after crisis, the two of them may not have played the most important role, but in every event, they were indispensable. Duque had mixed feelings about Jaina. Perhaps in the future, Jaina would still walk on the path that seemed to be destined to be difficult. She would watch her rumored boyfriends die one by one, watch the entire northern continent be destroyed by the Scourge army and forced to move west to the Kalimdor continent. In order to deal with a greater threat, to ensure peace with the Horde, she would be forced to commit patricide. She would continue to go astray in every attack. In the end, Theramore, which she had managed for half her life, was flattened by an Azeroth nuclear bomb. Everyone who trusted and supported her was killed, and her hair turned white overnight. She became the evil Jaina who did everything for the Black Horde and didn't care about the current situation. If that was the case, Jaina would undoubtedly have a serious conflict with Duque, who was a supremacist of the Alliance. But at this moment, Jaina was still a 12-year-old lowly. She had a delicate face that seemed to be carved by God. She had a small chin, clear blue eyes, soft blonde hair that just passed her shoulders, and a curvaceous body that had yet to fully develop. She was a classic beauty that was off the charts. Sai, 12 years old. Before Duque's transmigration, this was the age where he would have to be punished. Perhaps she already had a lot of thoughts of love and peace in her heart, but it was only at the level of a young girl's fantasy. Perhaps she would still become the Holy Mother in the future, but at this moment, she was still a 12-year-old girl. Lowly had three good things. No. Actually, with Duque's current status in the Jianghu, he was not inferior to Jaina at all. In other words, if Duque wanted to, he could totally adopt Jaina, change her name to Ailey, and teach her what it meant to be an Anababa. Cough cough. You must be joking. Duque was not such a person. He had always believed in his own integrity. Look, if necessary, he could loudly declare 3 times without hesitation. I'm not a Lullicon. I'm not a Lullicon. I'm a Lullicon. There seems to be something wrong with the 3rd time. Forget it, in life, there are as many troubles as the stars in the sky, don't mind these small details. Kale, that's could not help but smile when he saw that Duque was stunned after seeing Jaina. He suddenly remembered that the all-powerful deputy commander of the Alliance who had killed more than 200,000 orcs twice was actually just a 15-year-old boy. Miss Jaina is indeed the masterpiece of the gods. She is one of the 2 most beautiful girls in Dalaran. Jaina's face immediately turned red when she heard Kale, who was handsome and didn't show any signs of being corrupted at all. Kale's, that is. Kale's Kale, was. Looking at her beautiful face, Duke suddenly understood why Arthas and Kale, were infatuated with Jaina. Duke smiled and nodded slightly. Praise your beauty, Miss Proudmoore. Although I would like to use magic to show my respect to you, this is Dalaran. I'd better not embarrass myself in front of everyone. Jaina was a little disappointed after hearing Duque's words. Everyone knew about Duque's impressive achievements, but Duque was not famous for his status and achievements. Instead, he was famous for his gorgeous magic tricks to please beautiful women. In Lordaeron, Duke used a beautiful rose of ice and fire to praise Princess Kalia Menethil of Lordaeron. In Southshore, Duque had used an illusory ice crystal rainbow divine song, Ode to Joy, to promote Aurelia Windrunner's beauty to the point that almost everyone in the Alliance knew. Men worshipped heroes' invincible and unparalleled achievements. Women, on the other hand, loved heroes' gorgeous tricks. Duque did not know that there was a widely acknowledged saying among the upper-class ladies: only those who had been praised by Duque with the most dazzling magic were truly stunning beauties. Firstly, she was quite confident in her beauty. Secondly, Jaina wanted to see what kind of hero this man, who had been repeatedly recruited by her father and almost became Kurtira's horse, was. Now that Duque had refused to help, Jaina's disappointment could be imagined. Unexpectedly, Kai Zi started to make a fuss. Duque, that's not very kind of you, is it? I also know that Her Highness Kalia and Lady Aurelia are rare beauties in the world. Could it be that our Dalian Princess Jaina is not as beautiful as them? Kale, that's put his hands on his hips, looking as if he was going to stand up for his Dalian. This made it difficult for Duque to step down. Duque smiled bitterly. In the ordinary areas of the Dalian, isn't it not allowed to cast spells casually? Kale, that's gently stroked his shoulder. I guarantee it with my identity. Damn it, I almost forgot that Kai Zi is a member of the Kirin Tor 6-member council. Jaina did not speak, but she stared at Duque with her starry eyes full of anticipation. This was like chasing an old sow up a tree and then playing dumb pig jumping. Duque hated being forced, so he had an unspeakable evil purpose. Duque raised his hand. All right, for Lady Jaina's beauty. Under Jaina's expectant gaze, Kale, that's and the other curious onlookers, and under the gaze of Duque's guard, Gavin Rad, and his maid, Vanessa, Duque made his move. The immature ice circuit circulated, but with the help of the system, Duque created the most perfect fantasy effect. A huge ice crystal box appeared around Jaina. To be precise, it was this beautiful, almost transparent ice crystal box that contained Jaina. A box made of ice. Many Dalian Morning Star mages could do it. What they couldn't do was obviously the incomparably intricate composition of the sound tube, soundboard, gears, springs, dampers, and other components inside. Although Kale, that's immediately sensed that the composition of this big box was incomparably complicated, as a magical genius and mechanical idiot, Kale, that's would never have guessed that it was a music box. 2 hands of magic gently twisted the springs on the big box. 2 beautiful ice crystal sculptures on the box began to spin and dance, 1 male and 1 female. The simple rotation was accompanied by a dazzling stream of light. And the foreign music that sounded from the music box easily evoked Jaina's beautiful memories of the past. She even felt a little nostalgic and fell into a dreamy imagination. No one thought that Duque could actually solidify abstract music into tangible magical artwork. It was simply a miracle. The sound made Jaina intoxicated. Well, if this music score could be composed with lyrics, it would be, "Ignore me, I'm a peddler, it's only natural for me to be worn down." Chapter 277. Duque turned his head and threw Jaina to the back of his mind. There were many people and many things that could not be touched at this time. Just like Kel Thuzad. When he saw this sinister guy, Duque wanted to cover his head and smash it with a brick. Finally, he could destroy his soul so that he could not even be a lich in the future. Unfortunately, he could not. He was one of the 6 members of the Kirin Tor Parliament. If he killed him, it would be tearing apart the alliance and even starting a war with the Dalian. Moreover, Kel Thuzad was only a second-rate character. If he really wanted to make a move, it would be towards the first-rate. For example, he could get rid of the guy next to him and get a phoenix mount or something. Well, Duque's thoughts had gone astray. In fact, Duque respectfully paid a visit to Antonidas, who was recuperating from his injuries. The old man looked very energetic. He was not even lying on the bed. Duque met Antonidas in his laboratory. If Duque had not repeatedly confirmed that Kale, that was leading the way and that Duque, who could be resurrected, was not afraid of being shot in the back, Duque would definitely have suspected that Antonidas was a part-time dark warlock. The hall was very large and very dark. It was not because the lighting was not good, or because Antonidas had some kind of mental illness that made him like to hide in the dark and quietly enjoy the peace. It was because the air in the entire hall was filled with a large amount of dark energy. Even though Antonidas had already summoned a few bishops of the Church of the Holy Light to continuously purify the evil energy with holy light, the evil aura that came out of the hall did not stop. "Master Antonidas, is your curse still not healed?" Old Antonidas used a golden translucent cover to cover the thing and then replied to Duque, "What? Curse? That thing has long been shaved to the limit by Archbishop Fail. I was worried that His Excellency the Archbishop was too powerful and destroyed that thing, so I couldn't study it. That's why the Archbishop left a little." Duque was dumbfounded. He saw that Antonidas had used a mysterious method to separate the curse that was almost branded on his soul and place it in a mirror image of himself for magic research. "Doesn't it hurt when your soul is separated?" Duque asked. Soul separation was definitely 100 or 1,000 times more painful than someone using a saw to slowly cut off your hand. Duque didn't know how Antonidas had done it. The white-haired old mage stroked his beard. "There are some things that you'll get used to after doing it too many times. For the sake of research, this was nothing. Besides, aren't you also using soul separation? I've heard about your demonstration against King Eden. You didn't leave a trace of your soul in the mirror image, so how could you perform such precise operations? Your mirror image avatar was destroyed by that sword saint. You must be in pain, right?" Seeing Duque's expression as he recalled the pain, Antonidas thought that he had guessed correctly. "It hurts a little," Duque answered honestly. A perfect misunderstanding. Duque's mirror image avatar really wasn't controlled with his soul. However, being stabbed by the Fireblade clan's chief, Dal, with his triple blood blade was truly painful. The system genie didn't detect his existence at all, and the protective shield that the system genie had released for him in a fraction of a second was unable to block it. As for Duque himself, because he hadn't mastered the ice circuit, he didn't have the ice barrier that was commonly known as a refrigerator. After coming to the world of Azeroth, Duque realized that spells or skills that could give you a short period of invincibility and protect you from any damage were not easy to obtain. The invincibility of a holy knight had to be truly recognized by the holy light. Similarly, the mage's ice barrier was the same. Of course, Duque could make ordinary ice. But in the face of absolute attack power, the hardness of ice was just a joke. To achieve that temporary invincibility, it was already close to the realm of domain power. For this, a top-grade ice circuit was indispensable. Otherwise, even if he learned it, it would only be a weakened version of ice barrier that only gave 2 or 3 seconds of invincibility. How could Duque bear this? At critical times, 1 extra second was life. Oh, no, that was moral integrity. Either he didn't learn it, or he learned the best. "Did you come here to see if this old man can still fight?" All right, I was wrong. I shouldn't have abandoned my duties to the Alliance and secretly come here to do research. The next time that ghoul Dan comes, I promise I'll take action. Of course, it's also fine if it's someone of that level." Antonidas stuffed a magic beacon into Duque's palm. "Activate the beacon. I'll be there in a minute." Duque was a little speechless, but after thinking about it, it made sense. As the dignified Dalajan chairman, he definitely wouldn't need him to take action against any random enemy. The fact that he was willing to come at his beck and call was already giving him a lot of face. Besides, a Breaking Dawn mage who could teleport to any place on the continent at any time really had the capital to be willful. Duque didn't have much to say. Antonidas looked at Duque, who refused to leave, and blinked. Is there something? Or do you also want to study this unknown mysterious curse? Why don't you be my assistant? I'm very interested in how you use Hand of Magic. I can give you the treatment of a morning rank assistant." Duque was embarrassed. He scratched his head. Duque still took out the letter that Lady Janice wanted him to send to Antonidas. "Actually, Lady Janice asked me to give you a letter." Seeing the fire seal on the letter and the unique magical security method that lingered on the envelope, Antonidas, this old man, blushed slightly. He took the envelope with both hands, opened it impatiently, and then, the old man's face collapsed. It was an expression of laughter and anger. Antonidas seemed to want to get angry, but he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, he gave in. The ice circuit model, right? That little girl really knows how to extort. She. All right, it's my fault. This reason barely makes sense. All right, here you go. Antonidas waved his right index finger over his temple. Duque suddenly saw a series of mysterious, ice-blue magic runes appear on his temple. The continuous runes formed a small ribbon that wrapped around Antonidas' index and middle fingers. Antonidas then handed this rune ribbon to Duque. When Duque once again saw that familiar yet strange three-dimensional magic model enter his mind, Duque was so excited that he almost kissed Antonidas. System notification: congratulations, host. You have obtained the Breaking Dawn Magic Circuit Model, Ice Crown. This is a magic circuit model that Breaking Dawn Archmage Antonidas has continuously modified and optimized for 30 years. After comparing it with Anastrian Sunstrider's Arcane Fire Circuit, the circuit has no flaws. The circuit model is rated as S, perfect. It can increase the ability of the ice magic circuit by 108 times or more. It is recommended to practice it immediately. Chapter 278. 108 times? It sounded exaggerated, but in fact, it was because the ice circuit that Duque had created himself was too lousy. The magic model that he had casually found in Karazhan's library was definitely something that Duque had no choice but to do. Fortunately, rebuilding the magic circuit was not as troublesome as cultivating meridians like in the Wuxia novels that Duque had read before he transmigrated. Although the magic circuit was an important source of magic power for mages to cast spells, the magic circuit could be modified or even transplanted. The ice circuit was a bit like installing an air conditioner in the body. To put it simply, as long as there was a channel to continuously transport the heat away from the body, the effect of cooling could be achieved. To make it more complicated, all sorts of things were needed, such as filtering the air that was sucked into the air conditioner, mixing it with the fresh air outside, cooling it down, and then transporting it back to the place where it was needed. The same was true for the top-notch ice circuit. Compared to the ordinary ice circuit, the crown of ice was undoubtedly much better. First of all, the number of elemental planes that could be connected at the same time could theoretically reach up to 128, and the number of suction points that could absorb ice elements from the atmosphere was 256. The ordinary version had 3 planes and 12 suction points. Secondly, it was stability and anti-interference. The ordinary version had only one connection method, and if it was broken, it was broken. The crown of ice had multiple threads that were connected at different frequencies at the same time. If a few were broken, others could be added. Then there was coordination. Antonidas' advanced product had designed a magic circuit array that could mix the ice elements of various elemental planes with different output per unit of time, and finally turn them into a unified flow that would be injected into the next level of the circuit system. Finally, there was filtering. The crown of ice would automatically determine the purity of the ice elements in the circuit based on the physical condition of the owner. The more impure ice elements that were brushed down would gather over to the arcane fire circuit, and fuse with the elements brushed down from the arcane fire circuit to form a new spell, Chaotic Frostfire Missile. This kind of magic attack composed of impurities could not attack stronger spellcasters, but it would have unexpected effects against some creatures with extraordinary self-healing abilities. After reading the introduction of the Crown of Ice magic circuit, Duque was indescribably happy. However, it was necessary to be wary of others. This was the Dalajan's territory, so of course, Duque would not practice the Crown of Ice here. Looks like I'll have to find a time to go back to the Karazhan. Just as Duque was about to bid farewell to Antonidas, Duque's meddlesome system elf helped him scan the contents of the letter. On it was written, "Dear senior brother, it's time to return the favor you owe me. Give the Crown of Frost to Duque. I hope that he can help me take care of my precious daughter, Elusia. You can't refuse. Otherwise, I'll expose the fact that you peeped on me while I was bathing 20 years ago. It was signed, your most beloved junior sister, Janice. Duque was really blind. He seemed to have discovered some secret about how messy the circle of rich people was. But seeing that Janice still maintained her beauty at this age, it was obvious that Janice must have been a great beauty when she was young. But 20 years ago, Antonidas would have been close to 60 years old. Alright, this guy was really an old pervert. Duque pretended not to see such gossip. Anyway, Duque said goodbye to Antonidas with a straight face. When he came out, he was surprised to find that Kale, was still waiting for him. Your Highness, you. Duque had wanted to say, you're so free, but he changed his words. I'm really ashamed that you've waited for me for so long. The High Elf Prince was as dazzling as ever. His white teeth could be used in a toothpaste advertisement, and his golden hair could be used in a shampoo advertisement. Before Duque's transmigration, he would definitely be a national-level handsome. Alright, Duque was being modest, but in reality, Duque was jealous. Kale, that's smile was as amiable as ever. I'm the one who should be ashamed. I've seen a lot of magic messages and magic images. I also think that the existence of the orcs is a nightmare for the entire world of Azeroth. Whether I'm a part of the continent or a part of Kirin Tor, I should participate in the war. Unfortunately, no one can escape from their origins. Since I can't go to the battlefield, I can only help you in this way. Because this is also helping the Alliance. Duque suddenly sighed. Kale, was indeed a good young man. If not for the series of tragedies and conspiracies surrounding him in his later life, he would definitely be the kind of person who was a good student when he was young, one of the top 10 outstanding youths when he grew up, and an idol like him when he was older. Alright, Duque took back the idea of killing this guy and making him drop a phoenix or something. For now, thank you for your help, Your Highness. If possible, I hope you can call me Kale, and I also hope to be able to call you Duque. Alright, Kale, Duque, is there anything else you want to do? Could you help me find Miss Alicia Barev? She seems to still be in class. I can get someone to inform her. However, I know a good place to drink tea and chat while waiting for Miss Barev. Good idea. What Kale, said was indeed a good place. Duque didn't know how to describe this place. Generally speaking, this hotel, called the Magic Hotel, had functions of dining, entertainment, and gatherings. This hotel next to the Dalajan Central Square was more like an elegant salon. Sitting in a private room on the second floor of the hotel, looking at the same purple brick pattern under his feet, and then looking at the purple houses in the distance, it really had a different flavor. This was the Dalajan city before it was destroyed. This Dalajan city could be said to be of the same architectural style as the Sky City that floated in the sky in the future. Most of them were purple torch-like pillars or towers, fire-shaped or circular roofs, with torch-like golden edges and long white pillars below. It looked a bit like the Middle Eastern architectural style before Duque transmigrated. Sipping the faint red wine, he looked at the mages and magic apprentices coming and going below. Duque listened attentively. Almost everyone was talking about magic or magic-related things. There was almost no topic about the orcs. It was completely impossible to see that the dark clouds of war had enveloped the entire northern continent. Very peaceful, isn't it? Kale, asked. Yes. I don't feel the aura of war. In fact, it still has an impact. Because of the advent of war, in July, the entire kingdom has changed 70% of the fields that were originally used to grow magic materials to grow food. At the same time, the parliament has announced that any high consumption or high-risk experiments are prohibited. All battle mages have cancelled their holidays and changed to be on standby 24 hours. Sigh, war is really too terrifying. If this kind of war continues for a few years, I really can't imagine what will happen to the Dalajan. Chapter 279. Hey, Duque, how long do you think this war is going to last? Kale, asked. Duke smiled faintly. Are you asking another friend in a casual conversation as a friend? Or are you asking the deputy commander of the alliance as an official? Kale, that smiled faintly. Friends. That's simple. It depends on how many more neutral forces the reckless beast men will provoke. The more they provoke, the faster the beast men will be destroyed. Oh. Don't be fooled by the fact that the alliance has united 8 kingdoms to fight against the horde. In fact, there are still many neutral forces that haven't participated in the war, Duque said. For example, the goblins in the southernmost Stranglethorn Vale, the Wildhammer dwarves in the hinterlands, or the northernmost Kuel Salus. At this point, Kale, that couldn't help but sigh. He then raised his head. What if we maintain the status quo? That depends on how long the Iron Stove Castle's bronze-bearded dwarves can last. If they are destroyed before the Alliance's counterattack, then it's very likely that this will become a long-lasting confrontation between the 2 continents of the Eastern Kingdom. It's not impossible for a war to break out for 100 years. Kale, that's expression turned ugly. What if all these forces join the war against the horde? Duque raised a finger. Within a year, the horde will definitely be defeated. This is the best news I've heard recently. A melodious voice came from the door of the private room. 2 beautiful women appeared at the door. The one who spoke was naturally Jaina, who had a good impression of Duque. Jaina, who had just received praise from Duque and the envy of countless female Dalajan mage apprentices, had no idea that this was Duque's bad idea. Jaina's impression of Duque was not low. Of course, it was much lower than that of a certain prince of Lordaeron. Jaina, who had changed into a blue magic robe, bowed to Duque like a lady. Lord Marcus, we meet again. Jaina was in a good mood. Her face was full of sunshine, as though the haze of war had been dispelled by her smile. The other was the person Duque was waiting for, the eldest daughter of the Berev family, Alucia Berev, who was only 15 years old. It was obvious that Alucia had inherited her mother's beauty. No, she was even more beautiful than Duchess Janice. Interestingly, Alucia's appearance was more in line with the Eastern aesthetic. Her skin was white and exquisite, sparkling and translucent like carved ivory jade. Her beautiful black hair was parted in the middle, obediently falling from her ears to her chest. On her forehead, there was a beautiful silver hair ornament, inlaid with a sparkling sapphire. She did not have any makeup applied on her delicate and pretty little face. Under her long and thin eyebrows, a pair of fan-like eyelashes were embedded with a pair of ice-blue eyes that were as enchanting as the autumn waters. Her eyebrows were curved like willow leaves, and her nose was straight and beautiful. The wings of her nose seemed to be flaring slightly. Below her elegant nose was a small cherry mouth. Although she did not wear lipstick, she looked brighter and more attractive than those who did. Her well-defined lips were rosy, like ripe cherries ready to be picked at any time. Even though she was wearing a loose mage robe, it was not difficult to see that she had the golden ratio of a figure. Her waist was slender but not too round. She was as perfect as a model. She was quite a beauty. In fact, in terms of appearance, Alucia was definitely not inferior to the beauties Duque had seen, such as Princess Kalia or Aurelia. She was even slightly better than Jaina, who had yet to fully develop her body. If there was anything that Alucia did not compare to them, it would be temperament. The impression that Princess Kalia gave Duque was that she was noble and kind. Aurelia was a mixture of the wildness of a ranger and the elegance of a high elf. Jaina was intelligent and extremely confident. As for Alucia, although the Berev family was also a high-ranking noble family, it could be seen that Alucia had also received an extremely good upbringing. However, Alucia looked more docile. As soon as she saw Duque, she almost hurriedly looked Duque up and down. Alucia gave up on looking at Duque. She lowered her eyelids and slightly lowered her head, which was also a very standard ladylike etiquette. Greetings, Duke Marcus. I am Alucia Berev. Her timid voice made people want to bully her, or to protect her. Duque secretly sighed in his heart. With such a temperament, Alucia was destined to be a good marriage partner and a good wife for a man. However, Alicia would definitely not be a heroine like Aurelia. Alicia, I believe your mother has already sent someone to inform you of the details? Duque asked. Yes. In fact, it was my mother who personally used a magic message to tell me. Duque pondered for a moment in his heart. That makes things easier. Right now, I am essentially just a sky wizard. It doesn't seem right for me to teach a peak earth wizard like you. You can be my assistant for now. After I pass this winter and advance to a morning star wizard, we can confirm our relationship. All right. Duque still did not know that his words had already set off a storm in Kale, that's and Jaina's hearts. How could a morning star wizard be promoted so easily? At the level of a morning star wizard, one could already be addressed as a master. Further up, at the level of radiant moon, they were existences as rare as phoenix feathers and Chilan horns. Usually, wizards of this level were big shots. For example, people like Kale, Bats, Crasus and Kel, Thuzad could easily become dukes or princes, regardless of their origins. There were only 2 breaking dawns in the entire world. When Duque said he wanted to advance, he did it as easily as if he was eating and drinking. If it were anyone else, they would definitely be treated as a braggart. However, he was Duque, a man who had tricked more than 200,000 orcs twice and burned half of the elven forest. When the Kirin Tor assembly had summoned Duque for a discussion, Kale, that's had a very deep impression of Duque. Duque did everything with complete confidence, as if nothing in the world could escape his predictions. It was as if a man like him rarely boasted, and there was no need for him to use such deceptive methods to lie about such matters. If Duque dared to say something like this, it would only mean that Duque was 100% confident. One had to know that Duque would only be 16 next year. A 16-year-old morning star wizard? If not for Duque's status as the Alliance's deputy commander and his glorious achievements, this alone would have made Duque the most dazzling star in the world of wizards. Chapter 280. Kale, that's also believed that he was talented, but his speed of leveling up was far slower than Duque's. The power he had today was built with the long lives of the High Elves. Kale, that's part rippled, and Jaina, who still had the temperament of a little girl, jumped up and down excitedly, congratulating Duque. Elusia's expression was a little complicated. She did not know how to describe the relationship between her and Duque, which seemed to be close, but in fact did not have much to do with each other. She could only congratulate Duque lightly. In the Berev family, Elusia felt suffocated. The noble Berev family was a typical aristocratic family. Her father, Arikos, had extraordinary means and abilities, and had unparalleled influence in the entire Alterac kingdom. However, he was very cold when it came to kinship. He had almost no time to care for his children. Her mother was a mage, busy with all kinds of experiments, and similarly did not have much time to care for her children. Elusia's 2 younger brothers, Wilton and Alex, were like 2 sharks in their mother's womb. At a young age, they had already begun to fight incessantly, openly and secretly, for the position of the next Berev family leader. Escaping to the Dalajan was the best solution Elusia could think of. However, she knew that she could not escape from the Berev family. Unmarried women of the nobility had always been important political bargaining chips. Perhaps only when she was married off by the family, would she be able to relax a little from the family's strangle-like control. The only thing that was fortunate was that although her father did not care about her, he had never given her any shortage of funds for her expenses and magic experiments. Today, it seemed to be a little different. Elusia knew that her fate would be linked to the man in front of her for a long time, who looked like a big boy, named Duque. Kale, I'm not familiar with the Dalajan, but since you said that as long as you are a mage, you can attend classes in the Dalajan, publish papers, or do all kinds of things related to your identity as a mage to expand your influence. I happen to have time, so I'll give a few public classes. Kale, eyes lit up when he heard this. Oh. Really, that's great. What class do you want to give? What's the topic? Duque smiled mysteriously. Basic practice of multicasting, and heat transfer theory of fire. Duque saw that Elusia's body trembled. These were her mother's excuses for letting her study with Duke. The eldest daughter of the Berev family raised her head in bewilderment. She did not know why Duke had chosen to be a guest lecturer at such a time. Kale, that's knew that it was because of his suggestion that Duke had decided to expand his influence and work hard to rebuild the Stormwind Kingdom's mages. Dalaran had an academy that was open to the public. As long as one paid a low fee, they would teach apprentices with magic aptitude the basics of magic. After a few years of screening, those who passed the test would officially become advanced apprentices or beginner magicians, and they would be allowed to enter a higher academy to further their studies. At this point, the Dalajan's learning and research would become quite liberalized. Basic magicians were allowed to study different subjects according to their talents and preferences. They could also study under the tutelage of any magician who was registered in the school. There was a precondition, the equivalent exchange that mages respected the most. Apart from the public classes that were advertised, all of the classes had to be paid. The academy would evaluate the practicality of the subject taught by the lecturer, the theoretical content, the standard of the lecture, and many other factors, and then set a price. The apprentice had to pay for it. Of course, if one wanted to learn more advanced content, they would have to pay the price of becoming the lecturer's disciple. Lecturers also had all sorts of requirements for apprentices. Some wanted money, some wanted the apprentice to provide spellcasting materials, and of course, most wanted the apprentice to be their experimental assistant. Of course, the children of rich families had it easier, but the children of poor families often had to work. Acolytes also had various ways to earn the necessary money. For example, the simplest way was to sell oneself to the Dalajan Mage Guild, sign a contract, and work for them for years in exchange for money. They either worked as mercenaries or created magic items to sell. There were both opportunities and responsibilities. This was the Dalajan. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that as long as Duque showed enough strength, it wasn't impossible to recruit another group of mages. After all, the Stormwind Mage Guild only existed in name. All the mages added together could only fight 12 people. This was just the number of people in a small team. Apart from Duque and the retired old man Norton, everyone else was an earth mage. Duque smiled and wrote down a few advertising slogans. A duel of magic isn't as simple as you think. Still thinking about how to make a bigger fireball to defeat your opponent? Then you're out of date. The legendary mage who burned 100,000 orcs, Duke Marcus, will teach you multicasting. Once you learn it, you can definitely beat other mages of the same level. The three audience members looked at it and their faces turned pale. Arrogant, egotistical, and absolutely subversive. This was because, in the traditional Dalaran mages' teachings, the lecturers mostly taught how to deal with opponents who were also mages. They mostly taught how to build a magic shield and then bombard each other with a bigger fireball to destroy the opponent's shield and achieve victory. What? A big fireball couldn't defeat the opponent? Then it must be because your fireball wasn't big enough. There was no enemy that a big fireball couldn't defeat. If there was, then 2 fireballs would be enough. Now, Duque actually overturned all the arguments of these academic lecturers. If this wasn't subversive, then what was? If it was anyone else, they would definitely be criticized for being sensationalist, but Duque had a lot of achievements to back him up. Whether it was the battle against the demons in Karazhan and killing Mediv, the burning of the Elven Forest, the rescue of 50,000 elite soldiers with the ice ship, or most recently, the rescue of 4 kings from a large group of orc sword saint assassins with his own strength. All of them were dazzling achievements. Before there was better and more sufficient evidence to prove that Duque couldn't do it, no one could refute Duque. No one would be stupid enough to think that Duque was an academic mage. Duque was classified as a typical practical mage. No, to say that practical mages were weak. Because a practical mage could often fight 10 academic mages. Duque gave people the feeling that he was the kind of guy who wanted to fight 100. In the shortest amount of time, the news that the Alliance's deputy commander Duke Marcus was going to publicly teach practical magic in the Dalajan spread like wildfire throughout the Dalajan in the shortest amount of time. Chapter 281. Dalaran, which used to be bustling with activity, was now shrouded in an interesting and strange atmosphere. Hey! Did you hear? That Duke Marcus is going to have an open class in the Dalajan. Open class? Which Duke Marcus? Idiot. He's the deputy commander of the newly established Lordaeran Alliance, Sir Marcus. Ah. He's a super wizard who fought against demons and killed a large number of elite beastmen. Is he really that powerful? It's a free open class anyway. It's a waste not to attend. Any wizard who was a sky wizard or above was qualified to attend the open class in the Dalajan's high-level magic academy. Every day, there would be announcements of all kinds of open classes on the academy's bulletin board. Because of the favoritism of a certain elf prince, and because Duque was sufficiently famous, Duque's open class was placed on the front page of the magic bulletin board all over the academy. Not only did it have a dazzling red border, but there were also many hands of magic, which symbolized Duque's signature skill, releasing fireballs to attack the image of a scarecrow. Naturally, this attracted a lot of attention. The Dalajan would decide the grade of the open class in a very simple way, and that was through student voting. Any apprentice or wizard could press their magic seal on the bulletin board to show their interest in the class. The day before the class started, they had to go to the Dalajan's curriculum system to confirm the class. The academy would confirm the location of the class the night before according to the number of people participating in the open class. The result of Duque's open class was, of course, popular. It was very simple. Duque was famous enough. He killed the demon king Sardras, the successor of Karazhan, the Duke of Stormwind, the deputy commander of the Alliance, the youngest peak sky wizard of the current generation, the victim of 200,000 beastmen, and the wizard who could best use magic to coax peerless beauties. Any one of these could attract the attention of apprentices and wizards, not to mention all the glory and fame. The result of the unprecedented popularity of registration was that the number of applicants far exceeded the capacity of any Dalajan lecture hall. The Kirin Tor Council, which was actually Kale, had no choice but to announce that official mages would be given priority to attend the class, and the remaining places would be given to apprentices. They would be ranked according to their results, and the best batch of apprentices would be given the right to attend the class. 3 days later, more than 12,000 people attended Duque's lecture in the Dalajan's largest central lecture hall. The auditorium, which originally had a capacity of 10,000 people, had an additional 2,000 standing tickets. The auditorium was packed with people. As the central auditorium of the Dalajan people, its specifications were definitely off the charts. Even Duque was flabbergasted by the things that seemed scientific but were actually unscientific. For example, a sound transmission spell that could surround the entire auditorium would allow the voice on the podium to be clearly transmitted to every corner of the auditorium. Another example would be a huge magical image. In the auditorium of 10,000 people, Duque was just a small person to the friends sitting at the top of the mountain. But behind the podium, there was a huge screen that was as tall as 20 meters, which could magnify Duque's figure to an imposing extent. Even the audience in the last row could clearly see the hair on Duque's face. As for the central auditorium, it was usually only used in 2 situations. The first was the annual opening and ending ceremony of the Dalajan. Large numbers of apprentices, their attendants, friends, and followers would fill the auditorium. The other was when an important figure would give a lecture or a speech to the entire Dalajan. In the past 10 years, only Antonidas had enjoyed such treatment. Now, there was a situation that could be considered as the second one, Duke. In terms of battle achievements, Duque was definitely qualified. However, Duque only had the magical undulations of a sky mage, which made many morning star mages very unhappy. When Duque arrived at the scene with Alusia, someone immediately made a move. As soon as Duque went on stage, the wooden floor under his feet seemed to be under unimaginable pressure and was creaking. It wasn't just the wooden floor. The stone wall, the curtain, the door, and the huge glass window not far from Duque were all trembling as if they would fall apart at any moment. Elusia's face instantly turned pale. Prince Kale, who had arrived early in the first row in support of Duque, furrowed his long golden eyebrows. Spiritual attack. It was a common method for mages to test the strength of their opponents. For a moment, Kale, wanted to stop it, but he immediately gave up. Respect was not something that could be obtained by talking big. Duque enjoyed almost the same lofty treatment as Antonidas, so he naturally had to bear the corresponding pressure. Even though Duque was also a mage, and the Dalajan welcomed any mage to study in this sacred land of magic, Duque was, after all, not one of the Dalajan. After inheriting Karazhan and the inheritance of the guardian Mediv, who had once stood against the Dalajan, it was inevitable that Duque would be viewed with hostility by the Dalajan mages. In a sense, as a member of the Kirin Tor Council, Kale, should also help those guys. In the end, Kale, chose not to help either side. In the eyes of the group of Morning Star mages, a single Morning Star mage was enough to make Duque, a sky mage, depressed and make a big joke of himself. It would be best if Duque left, so that an outsider would not be able to strut around here. No one would have thought that in the field of magic, Duque was actually an out-and-out weirdo. In terms of the quality of mana, Duque was indeed lacking. In other aspects, Duque completely surpassed most Morning Star mages. What was spiritual force? The definition of ordinary spiritual force would not be discussed here. In the field of mages, the strength of spiritual force reflected a mage's maximum mana recovery speed, the strength of magic, and the ability to use magic. Logically speaking, Duque should not be too strong. However, when Duque released his spiritual force, the expressions of all the mages in the first 10 rows changed. In their field of vision, there was nothing but a smiling Duque. However, in the perception of spiritual force, the hundreds of mages seemed to see a gigantic creature suddenly pouncing out from Duque's body. It was not the simple form of condensing spiritual force into an awl or a net, like most mages. The spiritual force creature formed from spiritual force had a pair of enormous wings that spanned a full 15 meters. Every time the wings flapped, the turbulence of spiritual force was like a storm, sweeping across the entire auditorium in the tens of rows above. The high temperature of the spiritual force easily caused the temperature in the air to rise. With just a flap of the wings, it dispersed the spiritual force of the Morning Star mage who had provoked it. Following that fellow's blood-curdling scream, he went limp in his chair and even lost control of his bladder. All the high-ranked mages gasped at the same time. What kind of spiritual force is this? Chapter 282. In that instant, all the high-ranked wizards knew one thing: Duque was very strong. Some of them wanted to stop for a moment, but a low voice said something that seemed to have magical power, causing all the mages who wanted to retreat to straighten their backs. This is the Dalajan. Yes. This was the Dalajan. The holy land of magic. After the high elves had passed on magic to humans, almost all wizards who came here would prostrate themselves in worship. This place represented the greatest freedom in the world of magic, the most vast knowledge, and the ultimate holiness. Duque represented Karazhan. If Duque did not have a strong backing, if he did not have the title of Duke of Stormwind and the deputy commander of the Alliance, and if Karazhan had not disappeared from the Eastern Kingdom, perhaps some evil and greedy wizards would have challenged Duque for the right of ownership of Karazhan. Most importantly, Duque had made a fool of that fellow. That Morning Star wizard did not have much spiritual force, but he was wearing the violet robes of the Dalajan Higher Magic Academy. This reason was enough. Moreover, did Duque not cover the heads of the wizards with his spiritual force? This could be considered a provocation. The second challenger appeared immediately. Unlike the fellow in the third row, this time it was a Morning Star wizard in the second row. According to estimates, this was already a level 3 Morning Star wizard. Without any hesitation, this fellow condensed his spiritual force into an incomparably sharp spike, piercing towards Duque's spiritual force beast with an unknown shape and huge wings like the wind. In the world of spiritual force, just as the sharp spike was about to pierce through Duque's spiritual force beast, a claw with only 3 fingers grew out of the beast's body and closed in on it. Ka-cha. There was no sound in the world of spiritual force. This action itself seemed to have brought about a ka-cha sound. None of their eardrums received any vibrations from the sound, but everyone heard it as if they were hallucinating. As if an important part of his body had been forcibly broken, the level 3 morning star covered his head and curled up like a shrimp. Duque was still moving forward, neither too fast nor too slow. On the huge stage, under the illumination of the soft magic lamp, he walked toward the podium at a constant pace. He did not seem to notice the spiritual force attacks from the 2 morning star wizards at all, and continued walking with a faint smile and unparalleled confidence. Duque was clearly saying, "I'll leave enough time for you to attack." What an arrogant advertisement. An attitude that was 100 times more arrogant than an advertisement. They were treating the Dalijan advanced magicians like they were nothing. Not every morning star wizard was young and full of vigor. Many morning star wizards were no longer young, and they had no intention of fighting because of their age and experience. However, things were different now. The 3rd morning star made his move. This time, his spiritual force condensed into a ball and turned into a cannonball, shooting towards Duque's spiritual force beast. It was still the same claw. Like flicking a melon seed, the claw flicked lightly, and the cannonball was shot back at a speed faster than when it came. The fellow hurriedly activated his spiritual force shield, but it was useless. The speed was just too fast. Even if it was his own spiritual energy that came over, suddenly receiving a surge of chaotic spiritual energy was not something he could withstand. He clutched his chest in pain and pointed at Duque, unable to say a single word. The 4th morning star was sitting at the side of the 1st row. This morning star wizard was obviously one of the best among the morning stars. Whether he was a level 7 or 8, Duque did not know. All he knew was that this fellow's spiritual force had turned into a 3-meter-tall giant with a blurry figure. It wielded a giant axe and chopped down at Duque's beast. This fellow was too much. If the attacks from the other 3 were mainly probing attacks, this fellow was definitely going all out. Even though they did not dare to underestimate Duque, a spiritual force attack of this level could destroy the opponent's magic circuits and turn him into a cripple. Duque furrowed his brows, his expression turning cold for the first time. This time, the beast's counterattack was a long tail. A tail that was at least 10 meters long and as thick as a bison's body swept towards them. The mages could even sense the clear scales on the tail. Crack. The handle of the giant axe, the giant's head, and even half of the giant's body were all crushed by this incomparably heavy tail with an even higher concentration of spiritual force. Ugh! This fellow vomited blood on the spot. Bright red blood flowed out from the gaps between the fingers of his left hand that he had covered his mouth. At the same time, the tiles under his feet and the chair he had made were all turned to dust. He fell to the ground pathetically, unable to sit up no matter what. In the 1st row, no less than 5 morning stars looked at each other and nodded in unison, almost indiscernible. It was not an excessive spiritual force attack, and the level of the attack was reduced to that of a probing attack. However, this was a probing attack that was close to going all out. Be it a sword, a spear, an arrow, a stinger, or a hammer, 5 different spiritual force weapons attacked Duque in unison, arriving in front of Duque's spiritual force beast almost at the same time. Anyone could see that Duque's spiritual force beast had been specially made into the form of a dragon. Most of the wizards snorted. It took a lot of effort to make the spiritual energy look like this. Everyone agreed that it would weaken the offensive power of the spiritual energy. Since the brain would put extra effort into forming the form, most mages would choose to use the more simple and practical form of the spiritual energy. This did not include Duque. With the help of the system elf, Duque would not only make a dragon, he could even make a Ultraman and play with the death ray. What Duque valued the most was the system scan, which helped him instantly identify the weak point of the opponent's spiritual force. In every wizard's spiritual force ball, the quality and quantity of spiritual force were not evenly distributed, which gave Duque a chance. Duque was not superior to his opponent in terms of quality and quantity, but Duque only needed to find the weak point of his opponent's spiritual force, or even the weak point, and that would be enough. In the vision of spiritual force, the wizards could sense that Duque's dragon had finally revealed its true form. However, when the 5 large spiritual force weapons attacked, the dragon's claws suddenly lengthened, and 2 kitchen knives appeared in its claws. At this moment, Lucia, who was trembling behind Duque, heard Duque's soft voice. 56 consecutive meteor blast slash. The spiritual force blades danced at high speed, stirring up a storm that instantly engulfed the space between Duque and the 5 Morning Star wizards. In the blink of an eye, the 5 wizards collapsed into their seats. Chapter 283. Impossible. This was absolutely impossible. How could a sky wizard resist, defeat so many Morning Star wizards in the domain of spiritual force? Looking at the wizards who looked like frostbitten eggplants, no one could say a word. It felt like these Morning Star wizards, who were rather famous in the Dalajan, were complete fools, each of them extending their faces for Duque to slap. It wasn't just an ordinary slap, but one that grabbed their collars and slapped them back and forth until their faces were swollen. A total of 9 wizards, 1 Sky Star and 8 Morning Stars, had charged forward in the most shameful form of attrition warfare. In the end, they had been defeated by 1 person against 9, and all of them had been defeated without even catching their breath. Did they not see Duque slowly walk across the podium in an incomparably confident manner? In the huge hall, apart from Duque's footsteps, there was almost no other sound. Of the 12,000 people in the hall, not a single one was an ordinary person. They were either official wizards or acolytes. As long as they were acolytes, they would be able to sense the spiritual force undulations from the battle between Duque and them. Everyone was very clear about the probing effect of releasing their spiritual power. Evidently, even the acolytes who had not seen the whole picture knew. Duque had obtained complete victory. 1 against 9. If Duque was not a foreign wizard, and if Duque was a lecturer from the Dalajan, then what would be welcoming Duque would definitely be thunderous applause. The acolytes and novice wizards were all agitated. In this huge fan-shaped hall, everyone's gaze was on the first row. After all, only the high-ranked wizards there could challenge Duque successfully. In the middle of the first row, there were still a few publicly acknowledged Morning Star wizards. However, they were unmoved, as if they were the best students, listening attentively. In reality, the real focus was on the only Radiant Moon wizard present. Kale, that's the High Elf Prince of Kuel Salis. If Kale, that's made a move, even 10 Duques would be defeated. But would Kale, that's make a move? What a joke. Kaizi was here to support Duque. Seeing that Kale, that's had maintained a gentle and refined smile ever since Duque had appeared, the Morning Star wizards who still had the slightest intention of challenging Kale, that's gave up on finding trouble with this incomparably evil sky wizard. 1 step, 2 steps, 5 steps, 10 steps, step by step, Duque walked up to the podium. His figure was magnified by the huge projection screen behind him. At this moment, the first round of applause sounded in the venue. Applauding before the lecturer begins is a form of courtesy, a form of welcome. However, with Kale, that Sunstrider leading the applause, it was a grand welcome and support that could not be any more grand. Kale, that wasn't clapping from his chair. He was standing up and clapping for Duque. Immediately, the second round of applause rang out. This was from the little princess of Kuel Tiras, Jaina Proudmoore. This mage apprentice of noble birth had long been the dream lover of countless mage apprentices. However, she seemed to be a little close to Prince Arthas of Lordaeron, and the apprentices could only suppress their admiration. The third round of applause rang out almost at the same time as the second. It was from the person most young wizards pursued, Miss Lucia Berev of the ancient noble bloodline of the Arathar Empire. Even though she was standing not far behind Duque as an assistant, her real attitude still caused a silent uproar. It was only then that the people in the auditorium truly realized that the person standing on the podium was not only a true mage, but also a noble existence who was deeply trusted and respected by the upper echelons of various countries. There was no more hesitation. Immediately, thunderous applause rang out in the auditorium. It was so loud that it was enough to make people outside think that some kind of terrifying experiment had exploded. Duque's hands pressed down, and after a while, the applause gradually stopped. Clearing his throat, Duque's slightly magnetic voice spread to every corner of the auditorium. I'm very happy that so many people have come to listen to Duke Marcus's lecture today. In the following time, I will explain the importance of multicasting and the basic training methods. I hope that my lecture will be of help to everyone on the path of magic. Magic is a mysterious field. I think that the first thing that every lucky person who is qualified to step into this field should do is not to be bound by common sense. What? This can't be done, oh, that's impossible. These are the most unacceptable thoughts. So we have to free our imagination. Here, I will first demonstrate the benefits of multicasting. After saying that, Duque turned his head to Alucia, Miss Berev. Later, when you have a magical shield, please attack each other with the lowest level of level 1 fireball. And please do not use any metamagic abilities, and try to maintain the power of the fireball between 14 to 22 MP. Alucia nodded. Magic points were the standard to measure the damage caused by a spell. 14 MP meant that if it hit, it would cause 14 points of basic damage to a creature with no magic resistance. In the next moment, when Alucia indicated that she was ready, the two of them bombarded each other under the supervision of the magic scale. 5 seconds of casting time, the same amount of mana consumption, 16 points and 22 points of damage. This is what you all know as using a bigger fireball to deal with the opponent, right? As soon as Duque's voice fell, the audience burst into laughter that they were trying to hold back. However, when using a level 10 fireball, the casting time becomes 5 seconds. Normally, the person with the bigger fireball wins, right? That's right. An apprentice shouted. Alright, now I will split the mana required for a level 10 fireball, and then continuously bombard Miss Berev. Everyone, see the results. Alucia was still chanting, attacking Duque with a level 10 fireball every 5 seconds. Duque, on the other hand, used 2 magician's hands, a total of 3 level 5 fireballs, with a speed of 5 seconds between each fireball, bombarding Alucia in succession. Everyone was immediately surprised to see that Alucia, whose magical shield was continuously bombarded, was quickly showing signs of defeat under the situation of the total amount of mana consumption. Although the continuous attacks were not considered powerful, it was obvious that the magic attacks impacted her shield, which affected her concentration, causing the chanting time to be extended. At the beginning, Alucia could barely maintain the completion time of 2 or 3 fireballs within 4 seconds, but towards the end, the fireball, which was as common as eating and drinking to most official mages, actually took a full 6 seconds to shoot out 1 fireball. Everyone could see that both damage and accuracy were greatly reduced. Chapter 284. Just as Duque's 12th fireball hit Alucia's magic shield in a 3-on-1 situation, the shield, which should have lasted longer, suddenly exploded. Looking at the fireball that was heading straight for her, Alucia let out a cry of surprise. Everyone thought that Duque's fireball was about to destroy the flower, and there were even some apprentices who could not bear to see the beautiful Miss Berev disfigured. At this moment, Duque snapped his fingers, and all the fireballs that flew out actually made an elegant circle in the air, circling 180 degrees, and returned to Duque's side, floating in the air. Duque raised his hand, and all the fireballs disappeared. Duque's voice sounded again. I did not use other metamagic abilities to bully Miss Berev just now. This technique is actually similar to when people are facing the siege of 3 mages or magic apprentices who are of a lower level than themselves, and are often flustered by the enemy's continuous attacks. It's just that after mastering multicasting, you become the one fighting with the many. In order to leave a deeper impression, please take a look at the following footage. What Duque was showing on the magic screen was the footage of him using 108 hands of magic to rain down arcane missiles on the orc army at the Red Ridge Mountain, using the simplest arcane missiles to form an exaggerated barrage. The lowest level of magic caused the most gorgeous massacre. This kind of epic-making real war documentary gave the strongest psychological impact. Just 2 minutes of footage, more than 11,000 apprentices were mesmerized. Not every apprentice with magic aptitude had the opportunity to become an official mage. Below, in addition to those young faces, there were middle-aged magic craftsmen, white-haired human elders in their 70s or 80s, and high elves who did not have much aptitude but resolutely left their countries to seek the truth of magic. These people all had the same dream, the dream of making themselves stronger in magic. For a moment, too many people's breathing quickened. A hand was raised, and Duque called his name. Please speak. Excuse me, does learning multicasting require specific talent? This was the focus of everyone's attention. I can only say that those with talent will make faster progress in learning the supreme magical skills of multicasting. However, I believe that everyone can learn this technique after rigorous self-training. At the very least, it can greatly improve their spellcasting ability. Duque used a magic pen to write the words multitasking on the special magic board on the podium. The words were clearly reflected on the big screen. Multicasting is the most basic of the basics. If you have enough biological knowledge, you will know that whether it is humans or elves, the brain is actually divided into left and right parts. The left and right sides of the brain could actually coordinate, allowing the human body to make coordinated movements. In fact, the left and right sides of the brain can direct our left and right hands to make different movements and give different responses. With that, Duque showed it to everyone with the help of the system elf. At the same time, he drew a circle with his left hand and a square with his right. Looking at an extremely standard circle and a square at the same time, everyone thought it was easy at first, but later they were shocked to find that it was not as easy as they thought. Either the left and right hands drew both circles at the same time, or they drew both squares at the same time. The best was to draw two awkward patterns that were neither round nor square at the same time. There was never a lack of geniuses in this world, and soon someone succeeded. For example, Jaina, she easily drew a circle and a square at the same time in the air with the arcane energy flowing out of her fingers. Apart from her, more than 10 people succeeded one after another. Not only were there official mages, but there were also magic apprentices. At this moment, Duque stopped. I'm glad that many students succeeded. Because time is limited, please practice in this direction on your own. I can give you a simple standard. The second stage is this. Shamelessly, Duque gave his right hand to himself and his left to the system elf. Then, both hands started at the same time. The left hand drew a more complicated polygonal pattern, while the right hand drew an arc of different radius. The third stage. At this time, his left hand drew a Dalijan-style architectural pattern, while his right hand sketched directly at Elugia. Elugia's face turned red. In the end, when you can do what I did, it will be perfect. Duque used both his left and right hands to silently write the incantation. It was the incantation for the simplest, fireball, and frost arrow. These two completely different sentences made the audience gasp in amazement. Not only the apprentices, but even the official mages had to admire Duque's nature-defying abilities. Prince Kale, Bats, who also mastered multicasting, also revealed a thoughtful expression. To be honest, Kale, Bats could also blast out a few fire spells at the same time, but it would undoubtedly weaken the power of his magic, and it would be difficult to coordinate. Duque's training method undoubtedly gave Kale, Bats a lot of inspiration. It was no exaggeration to say that Kale, Bats' ability to practice this was due to his talent. Now, what Duque proposed was a more systematic training method with clear goals. Another apprentice raised his hand. Lecturer Marcus, may I ask how to satisfy the need to recite the incantation? I only have one voice. The more naive question was also the key to multicasting. Those arrogant big shots split into several voices in their own spiritual sea and fulfilled this request. Duque had a more convenient method. Of course, the essence of spellcasting is to use the incantation to mobilize the magic power in the body and connect it to the elemental world or the outside world. Brilliant mages can do all this in their own spiritual world. But I have a simpler method, and that is to use echoes. Duque snapped his fingers, and several walls made of arcane energy appeared in the void beside him. Duque said something casually, and the echoes echoed throughout the venue. Echoes. He actually thought of creating echoes to complete the necessary steps of multicasting. Obviously, this was another epic-making genius idea. For a moment, the audience was in awe, and once again there was a thunderous applause. This time, the applause lasted for nearly a minute. Duque's hands pressed down, and it took a long time for the applause to gradually stop. Someone asked again. So, how to create echoes when casting? Duque smiled evilly. Sorry, student, this is already a fee. I haven't thought about how to charge you, but it will be announced in 2 or 3 days. Suddenly, there was another burst of laughter. Next, Duque said a lot more. For example, he used the theory of thermodynamics to explain the flow of fire elements. Unknowingly, 2 hours passed. Chapter 285. Duque, with the knowledge of a transmigrator and an engineering and equipment major, systematically explained to more than 10,000 people what fire was, the nature of fire, and the characteristics of fire. For the magic apprentices in the world of Azeroth, this was an almost new theoretical system, but it did not conflict with the magic knowledge they had learned before. They were simply fascinated by it. Some official mages wanted to find Duque's faults and refute Duque, but they could not find a single flaw in his words. For example, heat will only flow from a high temperature to a low temperature. For example, if the temperature of a fire is high, it can heat up cold water. These seemingly easy to understand things, after being systematically explained by professional thermodynamics theory, almost all magic apprentices realized that their fireball would definitely improve. Fireball was not to be underestimated. As the first damaging spell that most magic apprentices learned, the popularity of Fireball could be said to be 100%. It was no exaggeration to say that the thermodynamics theory that Duque had brought over had an obvious effect on the improvement of the magic level of the entire Dalagen. When the last grain of sand in the magic hourglass that was specially used to measure time fell and a pleasant hum sounded on the podium, Duque just happened to say, "Today's class ends here. My lecture is over." His timing was so precise that he did not seem like a young man at all, but the most experienced teacher. For a moment, the audience was in an uproar. Lecturer Marcus. Don't stop so quickly. Speak more. Speak more. We still want to listen. Lecturer, that's great. After a brief uproar, everyone seemed to realize that Duque would definitely not delay the class. Immediately, there was an earth-shattering applause in the huge auditorium. Clap, 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 clap. The applause was like an endless tsunami, lasting for a long time. Apart from the unlucky few who left early in the morning due to injuries, every magic apprentice, every official mage who came to listen to the lecture, and of course, Kale, that's, all stood up and gave Duque the most sincere applause. After the applause stopped, Kale, that's had already come to the podium with a bright smile on his face. Wonderful, Duque, your lecture has completely exceeded the limits of my imagination. I thought you were best at actual combat, but I didn't expect your theoretical knowledge to be just as rich. I can't even tell if you're a practical or an academic. Although Kale, that's really wanted to ask if these theories came from Mediva's Karazhan library, asking now would undoubtedly help Duque start a fight. Kale, that's was simply happy for Duque. On the other side, Jaina had already become a fan. She chased after Duque and asked him all sorts of questions in admiration. Brother Marcus, do you accept disciples? Why don't I become your disciple? Right now, Jaina was still a rather innocent girl. Her watery blue eyes made it easy for people to feel sorry for her, so she agreed immediately. "Don't you worship Antonidas?" Duque blurted out. "Hey, how did you know?" Only then did Duque realize that he had spilled the beans, but it was easy to make up for it. Who in the Dalian doesn't worship Master Antonidas? That's true. But Master is very busy. Recently, he said he was injured, but everyone knows that he's actually in the laboratory every day. A flock of non-existent crows flew over Duque's head. "Antonidas, can you be more professional at pretending to be sick? Even a 12-year-old girl knows that you're pretending." Of course, Duque had no interest in provoking Jaina. Leaving aside her vacillating personality between war and peace, Duque had no confidence in teaching Jaina. He knew his own business. Duque was not a pure academic. Duque himself was half-baked in the real magic theories of this world. Even if Duque was unhappy with Jaina, who had cursed his father to death in the history, Jaina was still one of the more capable heroes in the history of the Alliance. She would be a core existence in too many major events in the future. Messing with Jaina's growth would make the future even more uncontrollable. Duque grandly refused. "My apologies, Princess Proudmoore. I'm actually very busy. This time, I'm here mainly to visit Master Antonidas and help Stormwind recruit some mages to rebuild the Stormwind Royal Mages." At this time, there were many people in front of the stage. When everyone heard this, they immediately understood. Duque did not hide his purpose. The world of mages was about equivalent exchange. Cheating was a bad idea. Duque smiled and turned to Alicia. "My assistant, I'll leave the answer to my questions about accepting disciples to you. Become my disciple or assistant, and you will receive my guidance and the right to read the bottom 3 levels of the Karazhan Grand Library for free. The price is to join the Stormwind Royal Mages as my disciple, and fight for the Alliance and Stormwind for 3 years. Just like joining the Dalian Mages could get all kinds of benefits, Duque's recruitment was also very open. It was both a risk and an opportunity. When she heard that she had the obligation to fight, Jaina knew that she had no chance. Her father would not allow the underage Jaina to get involved in the war. In fact, Dylin had already informed her that if the Dalian was in danger, there would be a specialized group of mages that would teleport her back to Tiras in the shortest time possible. Sigh. Jaina sighed. "Looks like I can only wait until this war is over before I have the chance to visit Marcus." Duque smiled and did not say anything. After the lecture, Duque was immediately captured by Antonidas. When he came to Antonidas' laboratory again, the white-haired old man did not treat Duque so well. "Oh, Duque, this is not very kind of you. You will weaken the Dalian's war potential." Duque shrugged his shoulders. Of course, he knew that even though the Dalian had always pursued a liberal policy, where the nobles of other countries could hire any apprentice or official mages who had not signed a slave contract, that was during times of peace. Now was the time between the war between the Alliance and the Horde. Of course, the Dalian had its own considerations. Duque's blatant recruitment would not cause any problems on the surface, but he was afraid that the Kirin Tor Parliament would make things difficult for the Alliance. Duque bowed deeply. "For the future and war potential of the Dalian, I am willing to make 1,000 copies of Karazhan's magic books and give them to the Great Dalian Library." Antonida's long white eyebrows twitched. 5,000 copies, 100 mages, 300 apprentices. 2,000 copies, 500 mages, 1,000 apprentices. Why don't you just rob them? The Kirin Tor Parliament's president was furious. Wrong, it's easy to rob them. Duque obviously knew the importance of those magic books. He was not worried that Antonidas would not take the bait. Knowledge was power. No. That's too many. At most, 200 mages and 500 apprentices. Thus, the two of them, who could shake the Alliance with just a stomp of their feet, began to bicker like ants in the market in this laboratory where there were no outsiders. The final price was 3,000 copies of magic books in exchange for 200 official mages and 500 apprentices. Chapter 286. In the Hillsbrad Hills, there was a stone castle standing on a hill. This was the temporary palace of the Stormwind royal family. Almost every day, new decorations were brought into the castle, be it rockery, or beautiful marble statues, or replacing the previously terrible floor tiles. King Lang repeatedly said that the kingdom did not have the financial surplus to pay the stonemasons' wages. The stonemasons expressed their gratitude towards Duque for saving their lives. Since they had nothing to do in the winter after building the blockhouses, they could find some stones to practice with. However, the stonemasons also expressed that when rebuilding Stormwind City in the future, they still needed to pay the required wages, but only at the cost price. Lang expressed his agreement. Looking at the so-called refugee camp that was becoming more and more prosperous, Lang was quite speechless. It was already quite inappropriate to call this a refugee camp. It was completely the prototype of a new city. The 3-meter-high stone wall could accommodate 3 people walking side by side, protecting nearly 500,000 residents. The newly cultivated fields in the distance were all protected by huge wooden fences. Every 300 meters or so, there was a wooden 10-meter-high arrow tower that could monitor all directions of the fields without any blind spots. There was nothing lacking in the city. The market, medical, sanitation, fire protection, water supply, city guards, and all the other buildings were arranged in an orderly manner. In a city that lacked money, there was no such thing as the state taking care of everything. All food and daily necessities had to be exchanged through labor. About 30% of the food harvested in the autumn was handed over to the Ministry of Civil Affairs of Storm Kingdom, except for the portion that was necessary for each family. In return, the Ministry of Civil Affairs would issue a batch of vouchers with a stamp and an equivalent amount of money. These vouchers could be used to exchange for cloth and other daily necessities at the market. The rest of the work was similar. Whether it was logging or mining, all supplies were collected in proportion, and the workers received vouchers as wages for the rest. Despite the obvious lack of money, the entire refugee camp was like a self-sufficient independent kingdom, operating extremely well. It was completely unimaginable that half a year ago, this was a group of refugees who had almost given up on life and the future. One day in December, looking at the black smoke rising from the chimneys in the city, Lang felt an inexplicable warmth in his heart. On this day, Anju and Lothar returned. Lang and Andoan gave each other a warm hug. Andoan, what's the situation? Sigh, in winter, I, the commander of the alliance, am a beggar, holding a broken jar and going around begging. I only got a bunch of promises that I don't know if they'll be fulfilled. There's nothing substantial at all. It was precisely because there was no one else that Andoan could complain so presumptuously. A promise is better than no promise at all. Lang asked a servant to bring him a cup of hot wine. When Andoan first came in, he did not see it clearly. Seeing that the room was already very presentable, Andoan clenched his fists. Damn it, am I seeing things? Why do I feel like I've returned to Storm Fortress? It does look like it, doesn't it? Lang shrugged. I didn't force the stonemasons to make these things. Anyway, it's Duque's favor. Andoan combed his hair with his fingers. Sigh, compared to him, I feel that my diplomatic skills are terrible. Yes, what good news does that kid have? Is a new team of mages from the Storm King family considered good news? 200 official mages and 500 mage apprentices. Although they've only signed a 3-year contract. Lothar's eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. Is old man Antonidas willing to let them go? Duque said that he used a copy of Karazhan's magic book to exchange for them. I don't know anything about magic. Anyway, what he said was true. Since Stormwind had put in so much effort to help collect it, it's definitely worth it to exchange a dungeon for these people. Of course, I agree. Agree. Oh my god, that kid is too impressive. Lothar patted Lang's shoulder hard. Ryan had a faint bitter smile on his face. Why? You're still not happy? If this goes on, there's hope for us to recover Stormwind. Lothar said as he gulped down a few mouthfuls of wine. Andoan, actually, I've been thinking. If we can recover Stormwind, why don't we give Duque the title of king? This topic was a little too heavy, and Lothar could not react for a while. Think about it. We all know that Duque is actually not from Stormwind. But how much has he done for us? Without him, perhaps there would only be 10,000 to 20,000 refugees left in Stormwind. I would have died in Stormwind City long ago, either at the hands of Garona or with Stormwind City. I know that you'll take good care of William for me. Maybe you'll also become the commander of the Alliance. But how much authority do you have? You don't even have an army under your direct command. Even if you lead the Alliance to defeat the Horde in the future, how many people will help you and William restore the country? But, look outside, Andoin. Outside the window were 500,000 well-fed citizens of the Storm Kingdom, who could safely survive the winter, and 100,000 elite soldiers who were full of morale and were willing to die for the kingdom. Before the arrival of winter, perhaps more citizens who had gone to other countries will rush back. This is all possible with Duque's help. Duque's ability is not inferior to any founding ruler in human history. At this point, Lang fell silent. That was the truth. The stability of the South Shore refugee camp had attracted the citizens who had previously left. The soldiers that had been lost in the Battle of South Shore had also been quickly replenished. If it weren't for the difficulty of raising soldiers, it would not be impossible to gather all the young and strong people to form an army of 200,000. Of course, all the young and strong people in the refugee camp had begun to receive military training. There were still plenty of reserve soldiers. Thoradin the Great is great, but as the capital of the Arathar Empire, the torrential fort declined after a short period of time. The other city-states had become independent kingdoms, such as Rotterdam and the Dalagen. There are still many enemies for humans. If this is an unstoppable trend, why not just let them go? Have you asked Duque? Andoin suddenly asked. No. But you can imagine that Duque also has subordinates, and Duque also has people who support him. When that time comes, it won't be a matter of whether Duque wants to or not. Lang sighed again. I, who once destroyed a country, have thought through everything now. Anyway, I will go with the flow. After the restoration of the country, Duque can be conferred the title of king if he wants. If he doesn't want to be conferred the title of king, I will give him the treatment of a prince, and I will set up a national policy that will be passed on to William and his future descendants. It will be enough if Stormwind can preserve most of the elven forest. All right, I also agree to it. It depends. Lothar finally nodded. Chapter 287. The harsh winter left most people with nothing to do. Of course, Duque would not waste this time. In the Hillsbrad Hills, in a huge wooden hall, there were many veterans who had experienced the war with the orcs. They might not be able to fight on the battlefield due to various injuries, but they used their own words and deeds to teach the new soldiers how to face the orcs. Not only that, the Nagas under Duque were once again put to use, continuing to train the soldiers with similar battles. In Karazhan, Duque finally had the time to come back, and then Khadgar ran away in tears. Master. I miss you so much. I'm bored to death. Duque used all his strength to resist, using his hand to stop Khadgar's crying soul. Damn it, oh, no, you're a ghost. You're not the only one here. Where's Michael? The Einherjars are all here. I have nothing to talk to those muscular men. I really don't understand why they still run every day when they're already Einherjars. Duque was speechless. It's probably because they have nothing to do if they don't fight demons, right? Duke suddenly understood why the upper nobles of the High Elves were so decadent. With unlimited life force, a boring life was the easiest to corrode the soul. Okay, get ready. I have a large group of apprentices coming, living people. Duque told Khadgar about how he had kidnapped a group of mages in the Dalagen. Yes, master, I will ask Michael and the others to clean up the room. Actually, I don't plan to let them stay in Karazhan for too long. After all, Karazhan is in a crack in space and time. I don't know if living here for a long time will have any negative effects on their bodies. I plan to let them come to the library 3 times a week to borrow and return magic books. You just need to be a good librarian. Open up the library for books below the earth mage level to them. Khadgar's soul put its hands on its hips. Okay. At least I won't be so lonely. Those who came to follow Duque were naturally not high-level mages. The official mages were all earth mages from relatively poor backgrounds. They could neither become a famous teacher like Krasis, nor could they afford the exorbitant tuition fees. One had to know that everything in the Dalajan was equivalent exchange. Even if one were to sell oneself to the Dalajan mages, the money obtained would only be enough to read a limited number of magic books. How could it compare to the unlimited reading in Karazhan? Besides, he could attend Duque's lectures 3 times a week in Hilsbrad's classroom. In fact, Duque wasn't fooling them. Duque's simplified fire elemental magic formulas that the system elves had deduced could allow their strength to improve greatly. The simplest example was that after training, every official mage would be pleasantly surprised to find that they had begun to master the 2 metamagic abilities, Enhanced Fireball, and Flame Throw. The former could shorten the chanting time of their fireball spell, while the latter could increase the range of their fireball spell. For ordinary mages with mediocre aptitudes, this alone was enough for them to work for 3 years. After the hearts of the mages were settled, Duque finally began to build his ice circuit. Crown of Ice, the core magic circuit of Archmage Antonidas. In this era, apart from Mediv, who had just died, who was a true demigod mage who specialized in all 3 elements, the other 2 mages had typical preferences. The Sun King, an Astrian Sunstrider, was fire. Antonidas was ice. However, whether or not the magic circuits of these 2 supreme magicians could be fused was a very serious problem. Because the circuits of both were quite domineering. The arcane fire circuit was not an ordinary circuit. In fact, after using it for a long time, Duque suddenly realized that the arcane fire circuit should be called the arcane flame circuit. What was arcane? Arcane was the phoenix that had been hidden by Kale bats. The real name of the arcane fire circuit passed down in the Sunstrider family should be Phoenix Flames. Why did the Sun King know that Aurelia had lost the cultivation method of the Phoenix Flames magic circuit, but only punish Aurelia for 3 months? Why did Antonidas give away the model of the top tier, Crown of Ice, magic circuit just like that? Was Janus Barev really that important? Duque had carefully considered this question before. Recently, the system genie had given Duque an answer. There were no problems with these 2 sets of magic circuit models, nor were there any flaws. As a foundation, these were the best ice and fire circuits. The crux of the matter was that when advancing to a higher level, a specific item was needed. A core item that could allow fire or ice elements to be further sublimated. Simply put, it was a flame origin comparable to Kale, that's Phoenix Arcane, or an ice origin of the same level. Otherwise, advancing to Morning Star was the limit of this circuit. Perhaps Duque could beat some Radiant Moon mages with the help of the system, but he would never be able to attack a true Breaking Dawn. Duque suddenly smiled bitterly. The old guys are really smart. Antonidas did not give Duque an arcane magic circuit, but it did not matter. The original, Phoenix Flames, also had an arcane circuit model. As a fire magic with explosive damage output, it required more arcane magic support, so the arcane model of Phoenix Flames was still very strong. The system estimated that unless he wanted to advance to a Radiant Moon Mage, this arcane model was definitely enough for Morning Star. If a Phoenix's fire elemental source was installed in the Phoenix Flames circuit, then the fire circuit would squeeze Duque's arcane circuit like a juicer. When that time came, a new source of arcane magic would also be necessary. Alright, let's take it one step at a time. In the highest level of Karazhan, Duque set up a series of protective spell formations. These were things he had learned from the books in Karazhan. It was not enough to defend against true experts, but morning stars were not a problem. With Karazhan's own defenses, it was still very safe. System notification detected that the host has a large amount of professional knowledge related to refrigeration. Relevant knowledge is being imported. Thermodynamic fundamentals, hydrodynamic pumps and fans, refrigeration principles and equipment, air conditioning principles and equipment, refrigeration process design, refrigeration and air conditioning automation, refrigeration and air conditioning engineering. Knowledge import complete. Optimizing the magic circuit model of Crown of Ice. Optimization complete. Beginning modification of the host's original magic model. The next moment, Duque felt as if he had fallen from a warm world into an icy hell. Chapter 288. The three-element pharaoh was a freak. However, in Duque's memories, only Mediv and Khadgar were three-element pharaoh. The rest were mostly fire or ice. Even though the system elf had fully calculated the possible consequences of practicing the Crown of Ice, and considered the possibility of fire and water being incompatible, Duque had still severely underestimated this. Logically speaking, the Phoenix Flames, which had the home advantage, should have the absolute upper hand. Thus, before reorganizing his arcane spell circuit and adding the Crown of Frost, Duque deliberately weakened the arcane spell circuit's supply of arcane energy to the flame spell circuit. What Duque did not expect was that the optimized Crown of Ice would actually turn the tables on him and take the initiative to snatch all the energy ports of the arcane circuit. What the F***ck? Duque cursed, a system elf? Why is the Crown of Ice suppressing the Phoenix Flames? Aren't the two circuit models of the same level? Oh, dear host, let me calculate for a moment. Beep, calculation completed. It seems to be because the Phoenix Flames is the basic version for beginners, while the Crown of Ice is the advanced version for advancing wizards. The latter is more complete. In order for the host to advance to a Morning Star wizard, the Crown of Ice has begun to absorb all the energy in the surroundings for advancement. Duque suddenly realized that not only had the icy circuit cut off the energy source of the Phoenix Flames, this overbearing magic model had actually begun to erode the fire circuit, attempting to transform it into ice. Wait. If this goes on, what will happen to my magic circuit? Beep, the latest deduction. If the host is unable to control the spread of the icy circuit, after advancing to the Morning Star realm, the icy circuit will dominate all circuits except the most basic arcane circuit, and will prevent other types of circuits from being produced in the host's body. At this moment, Duque's heart skipped a beat, as if it had been petrified by magic. Then, a gust of wind blew, turned to ash, turned to ash. Damn it. Without another word, Duque flipped the table in his mind. What happened to the three-element pharaoh? How could ice magic alone be enough? There was no good ending for those who were partial to certain subjects. Thinking back to history, weren't all the ice mages who specialized in the ice element beaten up in the end? Antonidas was pushed by Arthes. Kel Thuzad, who had become a frost lich, was pushed down by 40 players. Jaina's defense of Mount Hyjal could not withstand Archimonde's frenzied attacks. No. I don't want a simple frost circuit. Then. I can only ask the host to enter his spiritual world and obtain complete control of the Crown of Ice. However, this is very dangerous. If the host fails, your soul may forever be trapped in the depths of your own spiritual sea. You will become an existence equivalent to a vegetable. Whatever. Fortune is found in danger. This young master will risk it all. The next second, Duque's entire consciousness was sucked into a magical illusory world. Duque looked up at this lonely peak and was speechless for a long time. He thought that Mount Hyjal in the world of Azeroth was majestic, and Mount Everest, where people fell to their deaths every year before he transmigrated, was steep. However, in front of this lonely peak that stood tall in Duque's spiritual world, they all had to prostrate themselves. Duque did not know if he should call this lonely peak a mountain, because this was completely beyond the scope of natural scenery. This snow-white lonely peak in his spiritual world was completely the pillar of the world, supporting the entire world. Duque was on a platform at the foot of the mountain. Behind him was a bottomless abyss with rolling clouds and mist. In front of him was this peerless peak that struck one's heart and shocked Duque. The only thing that allowed Duque to see his target was the cold white light that kept flashing above the clouds. An inexplicable voice was attracting Duque, telling Duque that it was the most precious pearl on the crown of ice. He had lost contact with the system elf. Obviously, the strongest king system could do nothing about this internal magic world that went deep into the depths of Duque's spiritual world. Duque took a deep breath, and all that seeped into his lungs was cold water vapor. Duque suddenly realized that he had to reach the top of this straight lonely peak. Otherwise, everything would be empty talk. But how was he going to climb up this mountain without any tools? Suddenly, he found that on the cliff of the lonely peak, there was a small opening at the top of every 20 centimeters that sprayed out water mist. Water mist. This is the spiritual world that the crown of ice created for me? This, Duque suddenly understood. When he reached the edge of the platform, Duque said in a low voice, "Ice seal." The ice circuit that existed in an unknown part of his body suddenly rotated at a high speed, absorbing the surrounding cold aura and turning it into ice elements, gathering under Duque's feet. In less than 1/100th of a second, the water vapor that sprayed out, mixed with the ice elements, actually turned into an extremely stable staircase that stuck to the cliff of the lonely peak and extended out for about a meter. It just so happened that this staircase was actually stepped on by Duque. Duque looked up at the sky. If he followed the place where the water vapor sprayed out to make ice stairs, he really couldn't count how many steps he would have to make from here to the top of the mountain. However, Duque could clearly feel that in his body, or rather, in the body that he had imagined in the spiritual world, the reconstructed ice circuit was cheering and jumping. It was constantly encouraging Duque to use it to make more stairs, or to use it anywhere that the ice circuit could be used. How long had passed? He didn't know. Duque's consciousness was numb and blurry. There was no hunger in his stomach. Instead, in the process of continuously using the ice circuit, Duque only felt that the aura of ice had penetrated his limbs and bones, becoming his body and his life. He lowered his head and looked down. As Duque continued to build and climb the mountain, he had already made an extremely long spiral staircase. Every step was crystal clear, as if it was carved from the purest white marble. On both sides of the long staircase, there were 2 exquisite ice handrails. Between each long staircase, there was an icicle that was as thick as a thigh connecting the north, south, east, and west directions. It seemed to be a support, but it also seemed to be a marker for Duque to calculate the number of laps for himself. In Duque's field of vision, the lonely peak became thinner and thinner as it went down. Finally, it turned into a straight black line that pierced deep into this world filled with water vapor. What was the end of this place? Duque suddenly realized that if this continued, he would be completely lost in this world. His consciousness, which had become muddled because of the ice, suddenly began to operate again. No. I'm here to conquer the crown of ice. No matter how beautiful the crown is, it's just a decoration on my head. The crown is only noble because of the identity of the king. It's not that I have to beg for the recognition of the crown. I, Duque, am you, the master of the crown of ice. I order you to either destroy me or come out and fight me. Chapter 289. It seemed to be responding to Duque's shouts, but it also seemed to be acknowledging that Duque had truly laid the foundation of the ice circuit while continuously creating the stairs of ice. This cold world finally began to change. The white clouds that were rolling and surging under his feet seemed to have suddenly become violent. The movement that was like a gentle breeze and drizzle earlier became a turbulent wave. In the blink of an eye, the surface of the clouds bulged and formed a huge hill of water vapor. With a loud splash, the cloud layer that was supposed to be in a gaseous state suddenly turned into a liquid state in the blink of an eye. The clouds below turned into a sea that stretched to the horizon. Seeing that the sky had turned into the horizon, Duque was tongue-tied. Indeed, it was too stupid to focus on science or reason in the spiritual world. This huge lake that seemed to have as much water as the Lordaeron Mill Lake next to the Lordaeron capital seemed to have gathered together in just 3 seconds. A pair of incomparably huge arms made of pure lake water stretched out from the huge hill of water. Then, an eye that was even bigger than a carriage lit up on the huge hill of water. It was a water elemental that was even bigger than a titan. As the saying went, gentle as water. Sorry, this thing's temper did not seem to have the so-called gentleness of water at all. Instead, it was even more irritable than the fire dragon. It did not even shout, "Go to hell." With a wave of its arm, it smashed its arm toward Duque like a flying axe. Due to the problem of vision, as long as the distance was far enough, even the largest thing would still be small. Visually, the water elemental giant was only the size of a palm. However, when the water arm that was bent at a right angle approached, Duque could clearly estimate the size of the water ball in a real sense. He immediately cursed in his heart. This was a huge water weapon that was more than 50 meters long on one side and shaped like a boomerang. Duque could not think of how to describe this thing, but he was extremely sure that even if this thing did not cause fatal damage to him in the first attack, it would kill him in the subsequent second attack. That's right. A drop of water was nothing to a human. But to an ant it was enough to drown the ant. Right now, Duque was that ant. As a water elemental creature, it would definitely drown Duque in its most proficient water manipulation skill. Perhaps some people would say, would Duque drown now that he was a spiritual entity? Duque didn't know, but Duque's intuition told him that once he was hit, he would be done for. Dodge? Was dodging useful? It was impossible to estimate how many water elements were born after the sea of clouds turned into water. In Duque's peripheral vision, there were water elementals in the shape of muscular men showing off their prowess on the surface of the water around him. It was as if God had filled the entire reservoir with water and poured it down on Duque's head. The impact of the giant water boomerang was even more frightening than the collapse of a mountain. At this moment, Duque flipped out. Do you think I'm a sick cat if I don't show my might? Duque didn't even know how many times the frost circuit in his body had spun. He only knew that it spun faster and faster. In the end, it became a shadow that the naked eye couldn't keep up with. Since this is the spiritual world. Since, Crown of Ice, wants to test me and show me how powerful you are. Since you, as a magic circuit, think that you can dominate such an awesome person like me, then show me your value. Duque seemed to be talking to himself, but also seemed to be putting pressure on Crown of Ice, through some sort of declaration. Extreme cold wave. Duque punched the stairs under his feet. Instantly, an unparalleled cold aura formed a fan shape and blasted toward the water boomerang. The moment before the collision, the boomerang folded into a piece and turned into a flat, crescent-shaped water blade. However, after the water blade and the extreme cold wave collided, there was an earth-shattering explosion. This was the collision of water and ice. Water did not have enough volume to destroy or devour everything like a raging wave. Instead, it was the cold aura that caused the water to change first. The huge water blade was broken by the ice chi, and the water that burst out didn't even have time to pour down to form a waterfall before it was frozen by the ice chi into sharp icicles and shot into the distance. It went straight for the water elemental giant that had thrown its arm out. The icicles pierced through the giant and nailed it to the ground. This should not be counted as nailing it to death. This was because the cold aura turned the entire giant into an ice sculpture that was as huge as a mountain. The corners of Duque's mouth curled up into a smile of understanding. Since this can be done, then, at this moment, the huge water elemental giants around him went crazy. They no longer attacked individually. Instead, they dipped their arms into the lake together. In just a few breaths' time, Duque suddenly realized that the water giants had joined forces to set off an apocalyptic tsunami that engulfed the entire world. This was an apocalyptic tsunami in the truest sense. From the surface of the lake all the way to the sky, the vast and invincible seawater occupied Duque's entire field of vision. If he was an ordinary mortal, he would not even be able to imagine how he would break through it. Perhaps the only outcome would be to wait for death. Let this tsunami of despair destroy Duque's spirit. But who was Duque? A transmigrator. He had seen countless disaster movies, seen the White House that had been destroyed n times, and seen the Statue of Liberty that had been smashed n+1 times. Would he take this level of intimidation seriously? Tilting his head slightly, Duque spat out the words with a smirk, Ice Age? The ice circuit had formed an independent small universe in Duque's body. The cold aura inside was constantly splitting and multiplying like atomic fission. From 1 to 2, from 2 to 4, from 4 to infinity. Duque merely stomped his foot, and a cold aura that was even more terrifying than the apocalyptic tsunami instantly swept the entire world. When the huge wave arrived, there should have been a loud rumble caused by the vast body of water, but now there was only the sound of rapid freezing. The white wave quickly slowed down and advanced. The huge wave that should have been like a black hole or a whirlpool was still advancing. However, at the top of the wave, there were even more huge ice blocks that were as large as mountains. The ice blocks were churning, but when the ice blocks collided with each other, only ice crystals were scattered. The flowing water body became less and less. Finally, after 20 seconds, the roar of heaven and earth gradually subsided. What appeared in front of Duque was a frozen and dead world. At this moment, everything suddenly disappeared. The surroundings turned into a pitch-black void, and a pure white and gorgeous crown appeared in front of Duque. A magnetic neutral voice said, "Wear me, and I will grant you the supreme power of ice." You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.